Hey, what's up? Thanks for joining me, everyone. Let me know if there's a problem with the sound or anything. I'll get started real quick. Sorry I'm running a little late. I'll get started in a minute here. Okay. Just give me 1 second, see if anyone's going to join. Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started. So what I wanted to talk about was I did a 50-minute video on the Ukraine situation. I was hoping I'd have some people come on. I was trying to get people to come on to disagree with me because it's one of those situations where everyone's just going to rely on their own media source and say that that somehow proves that it's either a big deal or it's not a big deal. And so it's hard to actually go through things. It's one of my big pet peeves in life. I think one of the reasons that so much corruption is allowed is that we rely on other people to do the investigating for us. And so we could just say, oh, here's my guy that says you're full of it. Or, the other side says, no, here's my guy that says you're full of it. And ultimately, we never get into the minutia and the actual specifics of what's going on with the story. So, for example, this story, I printed up 15 pages and put it on a couple places. And I had people that would just, I went through two articles just like I did in my video, a left-leaning article and one that's more to the right, and I showed exactly why I think this was a huge story. And the only response I get from it's people just reposting left-wing articles without saying, this is how this article answers you. It's just quite simply, oh, you're wrong. And I think that's a terrible way to go about things. So I want to go through here, and I could bring up, if people like, I could bring up articles as I'm discussing them if we go that route, but I just want to talk about the situation in general. So, just right at the get-go, let's just do a quick rundown of what's going on specifically. So, I think that I wrote this out, and I'll just read what I wrote, like the actual facts that we know. And as far as I know, none of this is disputed. These are just the facts as we know. So the first thing to talk about is with the whistleblower situation. There's a whistleblower that apparently came out. No one knows. This person's claiming they heard Trump say something troubling to a foreign leader, which it's come out that was most likely a leader in Ukraine, and it probably has something to do with the investigation into Joe Biden. We don't know what Trump promised. Trump's claiming, I didn't do anything wrong. Once the facts come out, everyone will see that there's nothing going on here, etc. So we'll see once Trump says what he has to say, what's going on. Is what Trump said, could it be illegal or could it be terrible? There's a small chance. Like, the only thing I think he could have said that would be really unethical and I would be really against him, if he said, hey, Ukraine, I will give you so much money or I withhold giving you so much money on the condition that you have to find Biden guilty of something. That's because that would pervert the course of justice. That's basically determining an outcome, and it's providing incentive for justice to not run its course. That would be Trump saying, hey, you have to conclude the way I want you to in order for you to receive this money. That would be very shady, and that would be reason to criticize Trump and possible for impeachment. I would say the chances of that happening are very slim. Now, what he could have said that some people might consider shady, and this is what the media and the Democrats are alluding to, is he could have said, hey, we'll work with you in some way or give you some sort of foreign aid or something to that, promise them something of value if they helped the United States in their investigation into corruption of Joe Biden's son and the actions that Joe Biden took. Now, although that could be considered shady depending on what side of the aisle you're on, if you're someone who thinks that Joe Biden broke the law, you might say, good, justice needs to be done, or you think his son broke the law. If you're someone that hates Trump, you will automatically say, that's reasons for impeachment, that's terrible. But that's not unprecedented. We oftentimes have where our country will give aid or give benefits to a country conditionally, and the condition being that they help us with some sort of criminal matter, whether it be hunting terrorists or help with some sort of investigation into some government corruption and things like that. So that's not unheard of. The question is, should Trump be doing that or not? I don't know. That's a question for everyone to say, but I don't think that's grounds for impeachment. Now, I can make this prediction. Whatever it is said that Trump said, I guarantee you that all the Dems in the media, and I don't mean everyone, I mean like most of the ones you see prominently that are running the Democratic Party, not your friend down the street that happens to be Democrat, but many, many of them are going to say, yep, this is impeachment, no matter what's said. Just like with the Mueller report, it didn't matter that Mueller came out and found that there was no illegal conspiring with Russia. It didn't matter. That was still grounds for impeachment. Still grounds to remove him. Whatever these investigations say, it'll be spun as, yes, that's grounds for impeachment. Everything's grounds for impeachment. So that's a safe prediction I'm willing to make. But the irony of this is, of course, that what Trump's accused of doing by these Democrats and by the media was basically done by Biden, except worse in every level. So it's worse. There's two kinds of levels to look at this. There's what can we prove, and then there's how bad was the crime potentially, right? So what's the probability that it occurred, and what was the magnitude of how bad the incident was? So when we look at the probability, none of us have any clue what Trump said. Not one clue. None. We just have this vague accusation from an intel community. How trustworthy is the intel community? I don't believe anything they say anymore. They clearly were out to get Trump. The people at the highest levels were spying on Trump. We know for a fact that the two heads of the FBI right now, McCabe and Comey, we know both of them have been criticized by the IG for breaking protocol. I did videos where I think in the case of both of them, they broke the law. But even if you want to put it in the nicest terms possible, they broke protocol and brought shame to the FBI, doing things that's against their rules to be able to do. I'll get to that in a minute. So, and then you look at just the other people. Look at Lisa Page. Look at Peter Strzok. Look at Baker. Look at Rebecca. All of these people were involved in, we know from the IG report, in claiming that Trump wasn't a target of investigation while they were intentionally setting him up, telling Comey to go and try to get information that would incriminate Trump and then record it and come back to them. So we know that they all hated Trump and were out to get him. So why are we going to believe all of a sudden we have to believe this anonymous intel agent? Until I see proof, I don't know what they're talking about. And furthermore, why would we believe the media? Just coming off a week where what? They spread this Kavanaugh rumor that had nothing to do with anything, and that was reason for Democrats to yell impeachment of Kavanaugh? The media's lied over and over again and has proven that they're not actual journalists, but just mouthpieces for the establishment Democratic Party. So far we know nothing. So, Pat, to your question, do we know what the allegation is? No, but the rumors are that it has to do with Ukraine, and it has to do with a promise. So, the best theory would be this, that he promised the Ukraine something in return for them investigating Joe Biden's son and Joe Biden's interference into their investigation back in 2015. That's the best guess. Hypothetically, what else could it be? I don't know what else it could be. Like, he promised money for, like, that's the other thing. The president could basically make promises if he wants. The only type of promise that would potentially be something that would be terrible was if he promised something for self-gain. Like if he was like, hey, I promise I'll give you a government contract if you personally send me $5 million. Something like that would obviously be incredibly shady. But theoretically, the president could promise whatever he wants. So it has to be something that, if it's going to be a big deal and worth talking about and something that the intelligence IG would take seriously, it has to be something that could potentially benefit Trump. And so that could be an investigation into Joe Biden. If it's with Ukraine, as things were said, that seems to be the most likely case. So what I was talking about is the probability of what's being said being true. With Trump, we have no idea. We don't know what he said, but that hasn't stopped the media and the Democrats from yelling, impeachment, oh, Trump's terrible, he doesn't know what he's doing, oh, this is a horrible scandal, this is huge, this is huge. It's being covered 24/7 in the media, right? And they have no clue. They have no clue what was said. None. Just like, based on just an accusation where even the witness says, I don't recall this happening, all these Democrats and media outlets called for impeachment of Kavanaugh without knowing any of the facts. So they're screaming and they don't know the facts whatsoever. But the reason, the ones that are talking about Ukraine and Biden, the reason that they're shouting about the facts is shouting about this is what's going to be important. So on one hand, with Trump, we have no idea what he said, but they're saying already the media and the Democrats are saying that, oh, this is grounds for impeachment or this is a super huge scandal, right? My take on this entire situation is what it does is, more than anything, it proves the corruption of the Democrats and the media. And it specifically proves the corruption of Obama and Biden, which I'll get to the specifics of why that's the case. But the important thing to remember is, overall, in general, it shows just how corrupt our media is and how corrupt the Democrats are, because they've known about this Biden scandal since 2015, and they didn't do anything about it. They basically covered it up. There were a couple stories in the New York Times, but no one screamed impeachment, no one screamed investigation, none of the media screamed that this was terrible, and I'll be able to show why what they are screaming about Trump is far less. So when you just stack up what Biden supposedly did versus what Trump did, we have no clue what Trump did. We have, in Biden's own words, a confession at the Council of Foreign Relations in 2018, which I'll read that to you now. In fact, let me go through. This is the story of Biden and his son. So I wrote this, I'll read it to you. Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was on the board of a company called Burisma. It was owned by a man from Ukraine connected to the ousted former Ukrainian president, and it was being investigated by the Ukrainian government and others for corruption. So this company Biden's son was a director of, was on the board, was being investigated for corruption. Joe Biden admits that Obama gave him authority to withhold $1 billion of aid to the Ukraine, which, by the way, desperately needed this because they just got through ousting their president and were on the verge of bankruptcy. So to stop giving this $1 billion to the Ukraine unless they fired their head prosecutor, a man by the name of Shokin. Shokin was a prosecutor who was in charge of looking into Burisma, the company that Biden's son was on the board of. So do you get that? Biden demanded the firing of the prosecutor that was looking into his son's company. After this process, and it worked. So the Ukraine fired the prosecutor. After the prosecutor was fired, a prosecutor, Lutsenko, took over and was said to be, quote, solid. In other words, Biden liked him by Biden. Biden said he was solid. The $1 billion got sent to them. An investigation into Burisma was handed off to a different agency in the Ukrainian government, so not the incoming new prosecutor. That office failed to, basically buried the case against Joe Biden's son's company. In one instance, there were 3 cases, and 2 of them were completely buried. The third, someone got in trouble for taxes, but that wasn't released with who it was. In one of the incidents involved Burisma's shady businesses in the UK, the new agency forgot to file paperwork on time. And ultimately, the investigation into Hunter Biden and his company were stopped. Now think about that for a second. You have Joe Biden's son. Biden, by the way, and the funny thing is, and I'll get to all these articles, everyone admits that this was a horrible look for Biden. Right? Let's just take it from the top. Let's take it from even before you get to him firing. Why is it such a big story that they're looking for Trump's tax returns? Why was the Moscow Tower such a big deal? Does everyone understand why that's a big deal? This is why I've been arguing about the tax return case for months now, or for years now, right? What the tax return thing's about is the Democrats and the media are hoping they could get these tax returns and find anything that shows that Trump had any business dealings in Russia whatsoever. That's it. That's what they want to find. And to them, that'll be a smoking gun. But to me and you, if you're looking at this objectively, what's the smoking gun? That a multi-billionaire who has businesses all around the world had business relations in Russia? Why is that a story? Well, the story is because they then take the leap of faith and they say, Trump had business relations in Russia, and we think that he went light on Russia. Therefore, the reason he went light on Russia is because he had these business dealings in Russia. Or the reason that Russians wanted him to win the election was because he had business dealings there and they knew they could help him win the election and he conspired with them and then he would lift sanctions and things like that. There's tons of problems with this story. First of which is the Mueller investigation proved after 2 years they couldn't find one shred of evidence that not only didn't Trump but any American whatsoever illegally conspired with the Russians. The second is there is no proof whatsoever that Trump's been easy on Russia by any objective standard. He's been far more harsh on them than even Obama was. To his discredit, I believe. I believe that Trump had the right idea in the second debate with Hillary when he said, why are we fighting Russia and Syria? Shouldn't we be working with Russia to get rid of Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra? Yes, exactly. Shouldn't it be cheered even with our geopolitical rivals to be trying to have a good relationship with them? The Democrats loved it under Obama. Obama didn't just try to have a good relationship. He sent pallets of cash to a state sponsor of terrorists in Iran. So, why is it all of a sudden a big deal that Trump said some nice things about Russia, but ultimately had sanctions against them, ultimately increased domestic drilling, which hurt them more than anything, did all sorts of things to anger Russia, pushed them far further than Obama ever did. So the story doesn't make sense. But the third thing is, even for that story, you would have to have some kind of connection to Trump's policies being directed because of his business interests in Russia. And there's no proof of that. They can't even prove that he had business interests in Russia. But they're just assuming, despite all that, it's still a huge story. For 3 years, it's still the story. If we find out tax returns, Trump might have had Trump Tower in Russia, that proves that there's something shady going on. Meanwhile, the same media that's enthralled with that all the way back in 2014 knew that Joe Biden's son was actually, at the exact same time that Joe Biden was the point man on the Ukraine, Joe Biden's son was actually working for one of the most corrupt oligarchs in the Ukraine. Joe Biden ultimately says the reason we wanted this prosecutor fired was he wasn't going after corrupt oligarchs hard enough. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's own son is working with the corrupt oligarch. How does that make any sense whatsoever? Just take out the portion of him forcing this prosecutor to be fired. If Don Jr., it turns out, was working on the board of directors of a Russian oligarch-owned company right now, what do you think the media would be saying? But with Biden, they let it go. Also, though, it wasn't just Ukraine. The same thing was happening in China. At the exact same time that Biden was working with China, trying to get pro-Chinese deals in the United States and policies that were pro-China, his son was working with businesses in China that are connected to the state. How is that not a conflict of interest? No, I'm not saying that's automatically some sort of crime. I'm not saying that. But if the media is this enthralled with trying to get Trump's tax returns and trying to connect Trump to Russia in any way whatsoever, how isn't Joe Biden, while he's working as the point man for China and Russia, or China and Ukraine's own son being involved with corruption there, not a huge story? And the truth is, even when I go through these articles that talk about a defense of Biden and what he ultimately does, all of them admit this was a huge conflict of interest. But they didn't at the time, because Obama was scandal-free, remember? Biden was scandal-free. So that alone is shady. But now let's take it a step further. It's not just that his son was working with the very corrupt people he was wanting to ouster. He actually pressured with $1 billion of foreign aid and said that they wouldn't get him unless they fired the prosecutor that was investigating his son's company. So, how do we know that Biden did this, right? With Trump, keep in mind, with Trump, we have no idea what he said. None. And that hasn't stopped the media and the Democrats from saying, he's guilty. We need investigations, right? We have no idea what Trump said. We just have a vague insinuation. He promised something to someone in Ukraine. And that's enough to get this ball rolling. So maybe we don't really know if Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion. Except that we do. Because in 2018 at the Council on Foreign Relations, Biden admits as much himself. So let's see what Biden says. This is direct quotes from Biden giving a speech at the Council on Foreign Relations. Excuse my language for part of this. He says, I remember going over to the Ukraine, convincing our team that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I'd gotten a commitment from then Ukrainian President Poroshenko and from then Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk, I can't pronounce names, I'm sorry, that they would take action against the state prosecutor Shokin. And they didn't. They were walking out of a press conference and I said, nah, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. I said, call him. See, because Obama knew. This back to Biden. He says, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time. Do you understand the gravity of what Biden just said here? He said, Obama told me that I could do what I want. Obama knew what was going on. Go ahead and call Obama. And if you don't fire this prosecutor, you're not getting this $1 billion. A prosecutor that just happened to be looking into his son's company for corruption. So on one hand, we have no idea what Trump said, just vague insinuation, and they're calling for his head. On the other hand, we have Biden specifically saying that he was going to withhold $1 billion unless they fired the prosecutor, a guy who just happened to be looking into his son's company. That is known, fact, admitted by Biden. So in the probability of these events happening, we know 100% certainty with Biden. We have no idea the certainty with Trump. So why is the treatment of Trump so much different than the treatment of Biden? Well, because the media is not the media. And the establishment are just corrupt people that are interested in keeping their own in power. It's that simple. So then you might say, okay, well, it's not just the probability of the events happening. This is something we talked about in debate a lot, right? How do you weigh an impact of something? How do you weigh whether or not how to judge how bad or how good something is? Well, it's the probability it'll occur. And now the other issue we could talk about here is what I would call magnitude, or how severe is the alleged incident. You might have 100% probability, that Trump said to Russia, like, hey, we want to work with you. But that's nothing. That's, you know what I mean? That's the crime there is not that bad. So we know that there's a way higher probability that Biden actually did something like this because we have his own words. So what's the severity of it? The most severe, like what everyone's claiming Trump might have said was, unless you work with our investigators, unless you give us evidence and look into the crimes of Hunter Biden and of Joe Biden forcing your prosecutor that was looking into it to be fired, we won't give you a deal. That's the worst case situation. We have no idea that that's what was actually said, but that's what basically is being insinuated that would be an impeachable offense. That's not an impeachable offense, in my opinion. It could look shady. I can understand if you don't like Trump, it could look shady. But as I said, this isn't unprecedented for, we have all the time give conditional aid for conditions of people have to work with our prosecutors to solve corruption or work with our military to fight terrorism and things of that nature. So if there is an ongoing investigation right now and Trump in the United States going on by Attorney General Barr into this sort of corruption, and Trump said, we're not going to work with you until you out this corruption, then that's the threshold of what's there. So weigh that, right? Weigh that, and how you'd weigh that is that shady because it's a personal benefit of Trump? So weigh that versus weigh what Biden did. Biden got his son that was being looked at, the prosecutor looking at his son, to be fired. That is, the implications of that are staggering. Absolutely staggering. Now, what I said to do is this. Like, all you have to do is do this test. Switch the names, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, out for Donald Trump and Don Jr., right? So if I told you this, Don Jr. was actually working with a company in the Ukraine that was under investigation for corruption. Donald Trump called the Ukraine and said, look, we're going to withhold sending you this $1 billion we said we'd give you until you fire the guy, your lead prosecutor. So they fire the lead prosecutor. Do you think that the media would be like, oh yeah, that's reasonable. Yeah, that's fine. I 100% know they wouldn't. You want to know how? Because they're already freaking out about this case and they don't even know what was said. Just the potential idea that Trump offered a promise for something that could have benefited him is enough to make them freak out without knowing any details. So if it was to get his son, the prosecutor that was investigating his son, you don't think they would have freaked out? Of course they would have. And by the way, they should. I would say the same thing. If Trump had done this, you're darn right. You can't be using U.S. tax dollars and funds as your wedge to get your son off the hook for something. Now, as I'll get to, the defense that the media and that's it. That story right there. That's it, right? Now, let's say I could come up with defenses of Trump. Let's go back with it was Trump and his kid that did this, right? Let's say I could offer defenses. All sorts of stuff I'd come up with. It wouldn't matter what I said. The Democrats and the media would be shouting, and they'd have a point. Are you kidding me? Look at the optics of this. Donald Trump, son under investigation. Trump basically bribes with $1 billion to fire the guy investigating his son. Period. End of story. It wouldn't matter if I said, but, no, investigation now. They want investigations to make sure that Trump doesn't have a business in Russia because his policies aren't hard enough on Russia. That's how crazy they are. Now look, let's take another example, right? We know, for example, Robert Mueller, there was all kinds of accusations that Mueller was a bad FBI director. There were cases like, didn't he have a situation where there were some kind of innocent people that he put in jail in New York when he was FBI director? There was, his handling of 9/11 and kind of burying things under the rug and possible Saudis' involvement. There was his conflict of interest in that, he was someone who talked with Trump about possibly getting the FBI directorship job. There was the fact, he hired all Democrats to work with him. Tons of things to talk negatively on Mueller, right? Now, if Trump had fired Mueller and said, okay, I'm firing Mueller, who's looking into me, but here's 10 to 20 people that could tell you why Mueller was such a bad guy and he needs to be fired, right? Do you think the media would have been like, oh, that's reasonable. He didn't fire Mueller because he was looking into him. He fired Mueller because he's a bad guy for all these other things. Do you think that's the stance that the media and the Democrats would have taken? No, of course they wouldn't, because they're freaking out because Trump even mentioned firing Mueller without doing it. But on the other hand, right, Biden gets the prosecutor who's looking into his son fired, and the defense is, well, a bunch of people said that prosecutor was a crappy prosecutor anyways, so that's why Biden fired him. It had nothing to do with the son. It was because he was a crappy prosecutor. Even if that was true, it warrants an investigation, bar none. Hands down. There is no way that you wouldn't have an investigation had Trump done the other way. None. Oh, Mike, everybody says this stuff about my blood pressure and stuff. Trust me, this is just how I talk. I'm not upset or mad or anything. Well, I am infuriated, I guess, in the sense of the corruption. But trust me, I'm having fun with this. Don't worry about my blood pressure. I am on a diet, though. And I'm doing, for those of you who used to watch wrestling, Diamond Dallas Page yoga. I've started that, so. But yeah, don't worry about me. I'll be just fine. I'm having a great time doing this. Anyways, where was I? That's where we stand, though. That's the excuse that was given. A bunch of people, Christine, the one article, Christine Lagarde at the IMF says that this guy was a bad guy. Shokin was a bad guy. He needed fired. Okay. That's still, why would you make Biden the point man to do that then? As I'll show, like in the one article I'll go through, Biden knew that his son worked for this company, and Biden's office 4 months before Biden threatened them with withholding this $1 billion, knew that company, his office was interviewed by someone in the New York Times who admitted that they knew that company was under investigation. So why would you send Biden as the point man? Does that make any sense whatsoever? So they have no one to blame for themselves, even if they were hypothetically innocent. And they're not innocent. Because here's the end of the story, right? Here's the big shock. They say, oh, no, this guy needed fired for other reasons. And actually, and this is the other, there's two defenses. One, Biden wanted him fired because he was just crappy, and it wasn't because he was investigating his son. And two, actually, the guy was not even really investigating his son anyways. But if that's true, guess what happens? Can you just take a wild guess? What do you think happened after this prosecutor got fired? They replaced him, the new prosecutor came in and took the case seriously and investigated it towards the end? No, you'd be wrong if you guessed that. Here's what happened. They replaced him with a different prosecutor, but they didn't give the prosecutor the case into Burisma, the company that Biden's son was the board of directors of. Instead, they switched it off to another government agency, and that agency basically buried the story and nothing ever came of it. That's what happened. Do you see the insanity here? Who could have predicted it? So here's the story. Biden threatens this country $1 billion he's going to withhold for them unless they fire this prosecutor. And his reasoning is because this prosecutor doesn't really look into corruption. And so they get rid of the guy, and then the corrupt oligarch that he was supposed to be looking into, that case goes to someone else, and they bury it. Did Biden speak up and say, hey, this is outrageous. How dare you bury the case into my son's company that a corporate oligarch from the Ukraine was running? Did Christine Lagarde, did all the other people that are cited in the PolitiFact article that I'll talk about, that said, oh, this guy needed to go anyways, that's why Biden demanded him out, he needed to go. Did any of them speak up and say, wait a minute, why did you bury this case? They all admit, by the way, that Zlochevsky or whatever, the guy that was running Biden's son, owned the company that Biden's son was on the board of. They all admit he was corrupt. They all admit that. Every one of them say, in fact, the reason that Shokin, this prosecutor that Biden got fired, should have been fired was because he wasn't looking into this corrupt guy. And so they get rid of the corrupt guy, and all these people say, thank goodness, they got rid of that corrupt prosecutor. Now bring in the next one. And they kick it off to a different agency, and that agency buries the story. Where are they now? Why aren't they saying, wait a minute, this is outrageous. We gave them $1 billion, and they still buried the investigation into corruption. It's almost like they just didn't want Joe Biden's son to be investigated. Huh. Isn't that weird? Isn't that's quite odd, isn't it? So that's what we see happening. Now, let's look at this from another angle. So we can already see, that if the names were switched and this was Trump, there would already be an investigation. Trump would have been impeached. It would be 24/7 news. It'd be worse than the Mueller report. Because that's something clear, cut, and dry. Look at the Russia investigation. Nothing to connect Trump to it, and that was the story for 2 years. If Trump actually offered $1 billion to get a prosecutor looking into his son fired, there'd be special prosecutors, there'd be impeachments, there'd be people sitting in solitary confinement, there'd be marches in Washington, Pulitzer Prizes would be given to the media. This story broke in 2015 with Biden. That means for 4 years, none of the Democrats, none of the media, none of the people in the entertainment industry, none of the people in academia, none of the people in Silicon Valley, none of them spoke up and said, we demand an investigation into Biden and Obama, who Biden says in his own statement was in on it. Call Obama, he said. He's cool with it. Not one call for an investigation, not one call for impeachment, not one call for the media to do their job and look into this. Yet they're breathless about any little thing about Trump. But we have to believe them this time with this whistleblower. Believe them. This time, they're serious. This time, it's seriously real. Trump's just one person, right? I've said all along, if Trump committed crimes, let him go to jail. What I want is an end to the corruption and an equal application of the law, period. If you want to go after Manafort because he didn't register as a foreign lobbyist, that's fine. If he broke the law, he broke the law. Send him in jail. But what upsets me is the prosecution says he broke the law with the Podesta Group, who is connected to Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, founded by her campaign manager. The Podesta Group and Manafort broke the law with the exact same people at the exact same time. Manafort sits in solitary confinement. Podesta Group has to sign retroactive paperwork. Lying to the FBI, Flynn gets charged for it. Mills and Abedin, we know they lied to the FBI. As per FBI transcript, no punishment. Trump even had mean tweets and suggested maybe getting rid of Mueller. Obstruction of justice, they scream. Hillary's team deletes subpoenaed evidence. Nothing. That's what's upsetting. It's every single system of cultural power and actual political power we have in this country is as hard as possible on Trump and his supporters and as light as possible on all other corruption. That's what's infuriating. The media, the actual intelligence agencies and the investigators, Silicon Valley, academia, the entertainment industry, everyone that shapes our cultural opinions and cultural narratives. The only people out there are people like me and presumably people like you that are independently looking into stuff, and they're trying to tighten their fist and get rid of that content as well. So that's the real story here. It's the corrupt Democrats and the corrupt media. And by the way, not just Democrats. If there are Republicans that know about this and they're okay with Biden doing it, but they say they have a problem with what Trump's doing or something, they're corrupt as well. It's not limited to one party. It's the establishment is what it is. And there are establishment Republicans that go right along with these establishment Democrats that don't want Trump, that had no problem with the corruption under the Obama administration. So for 4 years they knew about this and didn't do their job. Some fat guy in a chair is doing their job better than they can. Does that make sense to you? I work 78 hours a week. I'm doing this just for fun. And because I care about the country. Thanks, Pat. We'll see you. So, what's their excuse? So let's look at another connection. Let's look at it this way, right? So the implication, I guess, is that had Trump offered some sort of aid to have a potential political opponent of his investigated by a foreign power, that's somehow illegitimate. Would anyone care to explain to me then, if the media is breathless about this and the Democrats are breathless about this, why we allowed the Obama administration to work with all sorts of foreign agents to investigate Trump? All sorts of British spies were involved in the investigation of Trump. That's why the UK was so upset and sent Trump a letter begging him not to release the classified information into the FISA applications by Christopher Steele and in the investigation into George Papadopoulos, because when it all comes out, guess whose agents were right there with the United States and the CIA and FBI? Yep, that's right. It was the UK intelligence agencies. So where's the big scandal there? No, Trump just asked for an actual investigation into a direct crime alleged to be committed in that particular country, and that's considered scandalous. I guess instead of asking Ukraine to investigate whether or not Hunter Biden broke the law or whether or not Joe Biden implied improper influence, they should have just asked them to put together a dossier and spy on them so that Trump could have wiretapped Biden. That would have been acceptable then, right? So from every angle, the outrage of the media and the Democrats shows them to be corrupt and hypocritical in this story. In every possible way, what Biden has been proven to have done is worse than what we even have no idea whether or not Trump committed. Every single way. And yet you don't hear this reported anywhere. Nowhere. Yes, there are good people out there, like maybe they're independent content providers, and there are people that you see, like maybe Hannity or Tucker that are talking about this story somewhat. John Solomon at The Hill is really great on it, by the way. Which, by the way, he just left The Hill. He's starting an independent agency, which I'll be eager to watch. But they have nothing. Now, so you start talking about this story, and what do people say? And at the beginning of my stream, if you didn't catch it, I say this. When I did a 15-minute video on this today, and I wrote up basically what amounted to 15 pages. And I put it on like some websites and stuff where people were discussing it. And the reactions I get to this, there were basically two types of reactions. The second reaction was this that I got was, oh, you're wrong, here's a site. That's garbage. I'm sick and tired of this type of argumentation. I don't mind, and by the way, if you could, even if you give me a CNN source, I take it with a grain of salt. Let me just briefly talk about what I think about, journalism. I think that almost all the mainstream media is garbage. I think that they're just mouthpieces for the Democratic establishment. However, having said that, that doesn't mean they can't provide actual facts. If CNN's the NASDAQ was, at this rate yesterday, or the Dow Jones was 2,400 or 24,000 yesterday, I could independently check that and it's yeah, that's true. It was. There are just facts like that they could be right. The problem is how they spin those facts. So even when I look at these articles that are being presented to me, from PolitiFact or from the Intercept, they get the base facts right. It's just their conclusion of the fact that ends up changing, right? Or what they think the facts mean. So you could take most of the time, not all the time, but you could take, I'm willing to listen to you put a source out that even I might think's ideologically biased in a terrible way. And so I don't mind reading it. But what does bug me is when you do this. I'll write 15 pages up where I'll go line by line through an article, like a left-wing article that says, this is why what Biden did wasn't that bad. So I chose the PolitiFact article, and I'll bring it up here in a bit. You can see it. I chose that article, and I'm okay, they say this. This is why it doesn't make sense. They say this. This is why it doesn't make sense. And now here's another article that they share 60% of the same facts, but this second article gives, fills in the gaps more, I feel. So I painstakingly go through that. And then you read that and you go, here's another article. See, you're wrong. Well, show me where in that article it disputes what I'm saying. So many people just want to say, this guy says you're wrong. This newspaper says you're wrong. That's it. This newspaper says Trump's guilty. This one says he's innocent. And that's the depth of our argument? That's not good. No matter what side of the argument you're on. You should never just trust someone that much that you're unwilling to get in the nuance of what they're actually saying, particularly in big issues like this, and coming up with your own conclusion. That goes for me. Don't just take my take for it. No, you could listen to people and get an idea, and you could trust some people more than others. But if someone says, actually, I don't think that Biden did anything wrong, and you're just here's a video from Rob, click, and you just post it and don't say anything else, you haven't responded to them. What about my video answers there? That's what makes sense. Yeah, I know the New Yorker did, Joe. Which, by the way, Joe, I'd love to get in touch with you sometime. I miss hanging out with you guys. But yeah, you're right. Even every article I've read is actually damning of Biden in this sense. So this is what happens. Every article I've read says this. It says, yes, Hunter was actually being investigated. In fact, let me just go. I'm not going to bring it up on the screen because I'm lazy, but I'll read it here. So PolitiFact does these fact checks where it'll be like it's true, mostly false, etc. So that's one of what they're doing here. And I'll post the article for you guys to see real quick here. So you could follow along if you wanted. But this is one of the articles, if you watch my big 50-minute video that I posted right before this, I go the whole way through it. But here's what they're checking to see if it's true. It says, is it true, as the image suggests, that Hunter Biden was serving as a director to Ukraine's largest private gas producer when the elder Biden, Joe Biden they're talking about, threatened to withhold $1 billion U.S. in aid to Ukraine if they didn't fire the prosecutor looking into the gas company? That's what they're looking to see. Here are their key takeaways. 1. Hunter Biden did hold a directorship for a Ukrainian gas company while his father was vice president. Experts agree that Hunter Biden's acceptance of the position created a conflict of interest for the father. Okay, so yes, it is true that his son was working for this Ukrainian company that was under investigation. 2nd, Vice President Joe Biden did urge the Ukraine to fire its top prosecutor with the threat of withholding the U.S. aid of $1 billion. But that was the position of the wider U.S. government as well as other international institutions. So in other words, their first two takeaways prove that the statement is true. Yes, Hunter was serving as director of this business that was under investigation. Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion unless the prosecutor looking into it was fired. So this statement is true, right? No, they say it's half true. And why? Because of their third key takeaway. We found no evidence to support the idea that Joe Biden advocated with his son's interest in mind, as the message suggests. It's not even clear the company was actively under investigation that a change in prosecutors benefited it. See, what these fact checkers often do is they cite actually what happened, the facts. So they'll take the statement. Okay, here's a statement we're looking at. And then they say, and here's the implications of that statement. And we disagree with the implications. Therefore, the statement itself isn't true. No, that's not how you fact check. The statement is true. We know that. It's a true statement. By the way, even in this article defending Biden, they admit, and I'm quoting from one of their three key takeaways, Hunter Biden's acceptance of the position created a conflict of interest for his father. So they're admitting it was a terrible thing. It looked really bad. Now, if it was a conflict of interest, what are the potential conflicts of it? Ask yourself. Okay, and by the way, let me just go to the end of the article because they basically admit this at the end. So the last section is, even though Biden's position with Burisma had no impact on his father's policy, how do they know that, by the way? They don't know that. They just say there's no proof. Remember up top, they said, well, there's no proof that's why Biden fired him. They don't have definitive proof that's not why he didn't fire him. So then the next statement they make is, even though his position had no impact on Joe Biden's policies, how do they know that? That's just their assumption. They don't have proof of that. But anyways, were his ties problematic? This is what they say. We found wide agreement among Ukraine policy experts that Hunter Biden's decision to become director for Burisma was a serious conflict of interest. It's not a crime, but it's a lapse. It's troubling, said Lincoln Mitchell, an adjunct research scholar at Columbia. Pfeiffer, who expressed reservations about the arrangement in the New York Times in 2015, said subsequent developments have only confirmed those concerns. It was a mistake for Hunter Biden to join the Burisma board, particularly given that the vice president was the senior U.S. official engaging Ukraine. Hunter Biden should have been more mindful. And Yoshisuke Herrera, University of Wisconsin professor who headed the university's Center for Russia, blah, 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 said Hunter Biden's hirings echoes the strategy common with Russia and other parts of the Soviet Union, which powerful interests try to secure influence on foreign policy by leveraging family members against leaders. Quote, calling Hunter Biden a private citizen, as Joe Biden tried to say, ignores the obvious links to the vice president. Conflict of interest rules should have applied. If Biden is working for the Obama administration on Ukraine, his son should not have been on the board of a company that there could have been affected by U.S. policy and spearheaded by his father. So everyone's admitting it was a huge conflict of interest. What does the term conflict of interest mean? Why is it a problem to have a conflict of interest? Well, that means that it's bad because there could come a time where your interest in one thing could conflict with your interest in another thing. So, for example, your interest in protecting your family could conflict with your interest of rooting out corruption in the Ukraine. That's what they're talking about here. So what are the potential things that could happen? Well, you could find yourself in a situation where, I don't know, you're bribing a country with $1 billion to get rid of a person who happens to be investigating your son. See, oftentimes when we talk about things like conflict of interest or other things like that, we talk about hypothetical situations that could end up very poorly. So we say like, oh, the reason it would be bad for Trump's son to be working, working for a company that's Russian-owned is, as a president, he could find himself in a situation where, theoretically, he could try to help Russia that would benefit his son. And we talk about it in those hypothetical ways. Well, here we don't even have to talk about it hypothetically. You got the actual worst thing that could happen with a conflict of interest. Joe Biden, $1 billion of U.S. money, used that $1 billion to threaten to actually succeed in getting the head prosecutor that was looking into his son's company fired. So how can these authors say, well, it was a conflict of interest, but, it wasn't that bad. Joe Biden didn't do anything that bad. It's absolutely ridiculous. And if all these authors admit it was a conflict of interest, where were all of them during the actual Obama administration in 2014 when this was occurring? This is always the case with the media and with their liberal darlings. After the fact, they'll say, oh yeah, that was really bad. Bill Clinton, yeah, we should have did more about that, about the sexual assault allegations. Yeah, Obama, yeah, we should have said something when Obama was wiretapping journalists that he didn't like. Right? Joe Biden, yeah, we should have said something when there's huge conflict of interest, but we didn't at the time. It's over with now. Oh well, no big deal. That's absurd. So, it just goes to show they weren't doing their job back then as well. Hey, if everyone can still hear me, let me know. It looked like it froze up on me for a minute, so. But yeah, that's what we're talking about. So yes, there was a huge conflict of interest. Now, what is the defense of Joe Biden? Well, the defense is twofold, right? And that is this. One is, they admit that Biden pressured $1 billion to get the prosecutor that was looking into his son fired. The first defense is, well, actually that prosecutor was really crappy and he wasn't looking into the company that well anyways. But that's kind of irrelevant, isn't it? Imagine that, in your family, you hear that your son or your brother or your wife or, your husband or whoever is under investigation and there's a prosecutor looking into that. You don't know how good that prosecutor is doing of a job of looking into your loved one. You just know they're the one in charge of looking into it. And so then you offer the head of that agency a large sum of money to fire that person. You can't then argue, well, it actually turns out that person was doing a crappy job anyways of looking into my son. The optics of that is the story. That's what warrants the investigation. For example, had Trump fired Mueller, and people said, dude, you just fired the guy that was looking into you, and Trump said, actually, Mueller was doing a really poor job of looking into me. He really wasn't doing much. That wouldn't be an excuse. People wouldn't have been like, oh, yeah, okay. That's the nonsense we're talking about. And secondly, it's totally hearsay anyway. So there's other articles like this article from the Intercept that I was given where they quote people in Ukraine that were like, yeah, this guy wasn't really looking into Biden's son. The actual Shokin, the actual prosecutor, says, yes, I was looking into him and gave John Solomon documents showing that Joe Biden's son, Hunter, was named as a target. Now, how fast was the investigation coming along? I don't know. But I do know this. It is claimed through documentation that prosecutor provided and through that prosecutor himself that he was going through with the investigation. Others, such as a deputy prosecutor, said he was not doing a very good job of going through with that investigation. So it's kind of a he said, she said thing. Would that be good enough? Now let's switch the name. If it was Trump, would that be good enough? Well, the prosecutor, imagine, Trump gets the prosecutor fired that was looking into his son, and then says, actually, I was told by several people in the Ukraine that the guy wasn't even really looking at my son anyways. And that prosecutor comes out and says, that's not true, I was looking into his son. Do you think the media would go, oh, sorry, prosecutor, we were told you were corrupt, so we're not going to listen to you? They would be like, holy cow, you were looking into Trump's son and he offered $1 billion to get you fired? Do you see the double standard and the ridiculous nature of this? That's exactly, so I don't understand how this is any kind of defense whatsoever. It doesn't answer the initial claim that why there shouldn't be, one, if you're a journalist, why you still wouldn't be interested in this story and do an investigation. Like, that seems clear-cut that would happen. You're not just going to take a few people's word. You knew the prosecutor was the prosecutor in charge. You knew that theoretically there was a case open into that company which Hunter Biden was on. And you knew that pressure was put on by dad, who knew that his son was in that company and knew this was the guy that was supposed to have the job of looking into his son. You wouldn't say, well, a couple people told us he was doing a bad job, so no need to look at this story. You wouldn't say that. Everybody knows that if you looked at it objectively. Everyone. They would not do that with Trump. You know it. They would have did it with any Republican. You just know it. They would have said, it's not proof. It's not proof that what the prosecutor said was true, that he was definitely looking into Hunter Biden and was proceeding with the investigation. I'll grant you that. It's not proof, but it's not definitive proof he wasn't. And to be a journalist and conduct an investigation in one of the biggest scandals in the history of our country, a vice president using $1 billion of U.S. tax money to bribe a country into not firing the prosecutor looking into his son. Again, this is the same media that's scouring the earth, trying to find that Trump has any business connection to Russia whatsoever, which proves nothing, but they're still looking for that. Every day they're looking for it. And they couldn't touch this story. Everyone admits afterwards, it was a huge, huge conflict of interest. Huge. But they couldn't cover it at the time. They couldn't look into it. And now they're saying, well, that's the defense. The defense is that, the deputy prosecutor and others said that he wasn't really looking at the case. Irrelevant. Again, even if he wasn't, there's no proof that Joe Biden knew that. That's what's important. What did Joe Biden know? Joe Biden knew his son worked for this company, and he knew this company was being investigated, and he knew this prosecutor was the prosecutor in charge of the investigation. Period. We know that. He didn't know the ins and outs of, how's the investigation into my son going? If he did, that's another scandal, isn't it? So to say, well, actually, this guy wasn't really looking into it, how is that relevant? Biden wasn't privy to those facts. Okay, so that defense is garbage. And again, that's all assuming that this is true. We have equal people. Like John Sullivan says, he got to see actual records from Shokin, who was the fired prosecutor, showing that they were looking into Hunter Biden. So who are you going to believe? Well, obviously the media and the Democrats, they don't care about corruption, so all it takes is one person to say, no, that's not true. Oh, okay, end of story. Is that how it works the other way? You remember Christine Blasey Ford, right? She had a witness that was her best friend who said that best friend watched the party that she was allegedly assaulted at. Remember that? Her best friend says she doesn't believe Blasey Ford's account. Okay, that's it. One person said she doesn't believe. That's it, right? Oh no, the exact opposite. Even with no one confirming the account, they believe it. But in this situation under Biden, even when he had a prosecutor say, yes, we are looking into him, even when we know Biden thought or knew that prosecutor was the one in charge of looking into his son, even with all of that, nope. So the other defense of Joe Biden that's given in all these articles, that defense is Biden didn't fire or demand this guy be fired because he was looking into his son. He demanded he be fired because the guy was crappy at his job, possibly corrupt, and never actually held the corrupt to account. How is this a relevant defense in the exact same way as the last defense? And people, I've had people all day citing me. Yep, there you go, end of story. A bunch of people said that Biden, this prosecutor was bad, so. Again, I already went through the defense with Mueller. I've already kind of talked about this. A bunch of people said Mueller was bad. That justified Trump firing him? No, because the guy was looking into Trump. Same situation here. It doesn't matter if a bunch of people say that this prosecutor was bad. He was looking into Joe Biden's son. Joe Biden knew that. You can't then demand that person be fired with $1 billion of U.S. tax dollars. You can't do that. So that's the defense, though, that was given. That's what they're going to claim. Again, all you have to do is switch the name Biden with Trump. Switch the name Hunter with Don Jr. That's it. And you can see exactly what this story would have been and how it would have been covered. And they'd have been right to cover it that way. But instead, they let them go. Now, the other defense, I'll get to this first. So, I go through the PolitiFact article, right? And then I read all sorts of other things. Like, for example, you're all these people, right? And you're very upset that supposedly, your Christine Lagarde and all these other people that cited in the PolitiFact article, and they say all of these Western people in the Atlantic and people in the media and people at the International Monetary Fund, they're all like, yeah, we want this prosecutor out. So it didn't matter. That's why Biden got rid of him. It wasn't because he was looking into his son, right? And the reason was Zlochevsky, the corrupt oligarch that owned the company that Biden's son was working at, in part that this guy wasn't going after him hard enough. Okay? All right, fair enough. So then wouldn't those same people then speak up and be outraged if after this prosecutor got fired, Ukraine then, instead of leaving the new head prosecutor take over, took that case and gave it to a different agency, and that agency promptly buried the investigation? If all these people were so concerned, they said, don't give them $1 billion. Don't you give the Ukraine aid until they get rid of this guy because he's not investigating corruption. Don't you think they'd be upset then 3 years later they buried it? Let me see if I can find where the hell where he says. Here's just the part where Shokin, the fired prosecutor, right? Here's what the Hill's John Solomon says. I'm quoting. The general prosecutor's official file for the Burisma probe, shared with me by senior Ukrainian officials, shows prosecutors identified Hunter Biden, business partner Devon Archer, and their firm, Rosemont Seneca, as potential recipients of money. So their file had Hunter Biden as a target. That wasn't just this prosecutor. That was senior Ukrainian officials currently who gave access to John Sullivan from the Hill, showing that Shokin, the fired prosecutor's files, had Hunter Biden listed as a target. Shokin told me in written answers to questions that before he was fired as general prosecutor, he had made specific plans for the investigation that included interrogations and other crime investigation procedures into members of the executive board, including Hunter Biden. Now, in full interest, there are people that also worked in that office that said that he wasn't making specific plans. Who knows who's telling the truth? But we see actual documentation that shows Hunter Biden was a target during that prosecutor's term. And at that point, it's just a he said, she said. And of course, what ends up happening is the Biden defenders and the left-wing people and the Trump haters just say, no, everyone who says anything damaging to us is a rotten liar, dirty, corrupt person, and anyone who says things defending us is a great, honest, moral, fantastic person. So I would say the proof's in the pudding. If this Shokin guy got fired because he actually wasn't investigating corrupt people like Zlochevsky, again, Biden's owner and boss, then surely after that prosecutor was fired, they actually got down to business and got the investigation done, right? Well, no, that's the exact opposite. It just so happened, coincidentally, they got rid of this prosecutor who wasn't doing the investigation good enough, and then finally the investigation was buried. Most of the this is from the article again. Most of the general prosecutor's investigative work on Burisma focused on 3 separate cases, and most stopped abruptly once Shokin was fired. The most prominent of the Burisma cases was transferred to a different Ukrainian agency, closely aligned with the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. An embassy, by the way, that would have been working with, drumroll please, the Obama administration. They're known as the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of the Ukraine, or NABU. According to the case file and current general prosecutor Lutsenko. NABU closed that case and a second case involving alleged improper money transfers in London was dropped when Ukrainian officials failed to file the necessary documents required by the deadline. The general prosecutor's office successfully secured a multi-million-dollar judgment in a tax evasion case, but they didn't say who the defendant was. So if this was really about actually getting people in there that would investigate corruption, and specifically to this guy Zlochevsky that was the boss of Hunter Biden, isn't it weird that Biden fired the prosecutor that was looking into his son's company, and then almost instantaneously the charge cases were just dropped? In one case because, whoops, we forgot to file paperwork in time. Oh, oops, our big oopsie. The proof is in the pudding. Now, where's all the people that were complaining about corruption being let go? Here. They're strangely silent when it allowed Joe Biden's son to walk free, aren't they? But wait a minute, I thought Biden demanded that person be fired because they weren't investigating the corrupt. What happened? Yeah, person after person who disagrees with me just cites, nope, they got rid of, that's it. All these people say that Biden wanted rid of this guy because He was just in general corrupt. It had nothing to do with his son. The PolitiFact article I was reading from says the same thing. It says, well, there's not proof. This is the language they use. We found no evidence to support the idea Joe Biden advocated with his son's interest in mind. So what, you didn't find an email or a statement directly from Joe saying, hey, the reason I did this was to help my son. So, okay, no need to investigate. They admit that Biden knew about his son's ties. He knew he was with this company and the company was being investigated. They admit Biden made the threat and got the guy fired. This is what they say about it. This is PolitiFact. There's a strong case that Hunter Biden's position with the company had nothing to do with Biden's position on Shokin's ouster. That's because other Western leaders wanted him gone. For instance, Christine Lagarde wanted him gone. Stephen Pfeiffer wanted him gone. Anders Aslin wanted him gone because he failed to prosecute anyone significant. How is that proof that Biden didn't fire him because of his son? So as long as other people say, actually, yeah, there were other reasons to fire this guy, that's proof that Biden didn't take the fact this guy was looking into his son into consideration? Do you see this clever trick that the fact checkers use? They don't have proof one way or the other. We could say it was 50-50. Heck, you could say it's 10% he did it for his son and 90% that his son had nothing to do with it. That's still reason to investigate because the implications are so high if his son had anything to do with it, that it's one of the biggest scandals we've ever seen. They'll spend all this time investigating any claim about Kavanaugh or Trump, but they wouldn't look into this. And then they just assert Hunter Biden's position with Burisma had no impact on his father's policies. How do they know that? They have no clue. They're just making an assertion. It definitely warrants an investigation. The irony, again, is, imagine this, right? Let's just assume this. All these Democrats are going crazy over this whistleblower story, right? Let's say the whistleblower story becomes what I think it is, right? That this whistleblower says he's someone in the intelligence agency who is, by the way, spying on Trump. Wasn't that Trump's original accusation? Members of the intel community are spying on me? Wouldn't it be nice? Is this what it's going to become now? Anytime a president says something that any intelligence agency finds against their political beliefs, they then get to run to Congress and there has to be an investigation. Funny, there's an investigation into that, but not Joe Biden withholding $1 billion of taxpayer money until a prosecutor looking into his son's fired. Isn't that funny how that works? Anyways, what's going on with... So, let's say, hypothetically, this is what happens with the whistleblower situation. This guy says in the intelligence agency, I was listening to Trump talk to the president of the Ukraine, and Trump said to the president of the Ukraine, hey, listen, we're going to give you, like, these weapons and, like, military aid and, like, you know, military technology that you want. But before we do that, we want you to reopen this investigation into Hunter Biden. Okay? Now, let's say, okay, they said, fine. We'll reopen the investigation. And then later, someone in the Ukraine says, no, wait. We were actually reopening that investigation anyways. Trump's offer of aid had nothing to do with it. Oh, okay. No need for an investigation then. Someone in the Ukraine said they were going to do it anyways, so. That's it, right? The media would be like, oh, that's it. You know, a bunch of people said there were other reasons for it. Oh, okay. No big deal. Or the reason, a bunch of people come out and go, well, the reason that investigation was important because actually it was connected to other organized crime efforts that we're looking into. It had nothing to do with the fact that it was Joe Biden's son. That's not it at all. That's just incidental that it's Biden's son. What's more important is the investigation. We know for a fact, for example, that there are investigations going on in the United States into that money. Right? So again, let's go back to where we were then. The investigation's dropped. It's completely dropped, right? The new guy that comes in, his name's Lutsenko. He's the new prosecutor. Biden, if you remember what he said. The new guy they brought in was a solid guy. Remember that? I say, quote, well, son of a bitch, he got fired, and they put in place someone who was solid at the time. Okay. So, Biden said this guy's solid, Lutsenko. Here's what Lutsenko says in 2018. But then as Biden's 2020 campaign ramped up over the past year, Lutsenko, the Ukrainian prosecutor that Biden once hailed as solid replacement for Shokin, began looking at what happened in the Burisma case that had been shut down. Lutsenko told me, while reviewing the Burisma investigative files, he discovered, quote, members of the board obtained funds as well as another U.S.-based legal entity, Rosemont Seneca Partners, LLC, for consulting services. Remember, Rosemont is the U.S. company that Hunter Biden's running. Lutsenko said some of the evidence he knows about in the Burisma case may interest U.S. authorities, and he'd like to present the information to new U.S. Attorney General William Barr, particularly about the vice president's intervention. Unfortunately, Mr. Biden had correlated and connected this aid with some of the HR personnel issues and changes in the prosecutor's office. Do you get that? The guy that Biden called solid now's looking back into the evidence and he says, actually there was money that went to Hunter Biden and his U.S. company that we haven't investigated. And I find it very troubling that Biden exerted pressure on this, and I'd like to talk to the Attorney General. That's the guy Biden called solid. So the former prosecutor said that there was stuff with Hunter Biden that needed investigated. Then he gets fired and the investigation gets shelved, partly because they forgot to file paperwork in time. And now the new prosecutor that Biden said solid looks at it and goes, yeah, there's something really shady here. I want to talk to U.S. authorities. But still, you have to believe all the people that say, no, there's nothing shady here. Nazir Kolundinsky, the lead anti-corruption prosecutor in Lutsenko's office, confirmed to me in an interview that part of the Burisma investigation was reopened in 2018, after Biden's remark, we started the case again. But he said the separate Ukrainian police agency that investigates corruption had dragged its feet in gathering evidence. We don't see any result from this case 1 year after the reopening because of some external influence. So the police agency that was connected to the U.S. embassy that Obama was running, that at the time said, you're not going to get this $1 billion unless you go get rid of this prosecutor. They then get the $1 billion and start looking at, you think they get the $1 billion and maybe they say, geez, we don't want to go after Joe Biden's son who just threatened to take this $1 billion away from us? Do you think that's possible whatsoever? You don't think that had some influence on their decision? Now we have the new prosecutor's office that Biden called solid, saying nothing was done. This case was basically buried. We're now looking at it and realizing there needs to be an investigation. There were external influences. We question, it was a shame that Biden exerted pressure like this. That's what this office is saying. Now, in the interest of total transparency, I was provided an article from the Intercept, which I can go more through, that I think is much like the PolitiFact article. This Nazar guy that I just talked about, he's the guy who specifically says, we don't see any result from the case 1 year after reopening because of external influence. The Intercept article says, this Nazir guy was recently had removed because Ukrainian prosecutor wiretapped this person and caught on tape him advising suspects in a corruption probe how to not get caught. That's it. That's all it says. The disgraced prosecutor, Nazir, was then cited as a source in articles attacking her as a deep state plotter on far-right American websites. So the implication is then, this Nazir person must be lying. But it doesn't matter. Like, they don't give any evidence as to what happened. They just say she was caught. How do we know? Basically, what it looks like is this. If I'm being as charitable as possible, and this is kind of the reading I've got from a lot of reading of what's going on in the Ukraine. There's all sorts of corruption on all sides of the aisle. You know, for example, there were talks of investigations into the fact that we know for a fact that someone connected to the DNC actually specifically went to the Ukraine with the express purpose of getting dirt on Donald Trump and Paul Manafort before the 2016 election. We know that hands down, definitive proof. We know that there is an investigation ongoing in the Ukraine right now as to whether or not people in their country broke their laws by illegally releasing information about an illegal case they had into Paul Manafort to a DNC member. 100% proven. We know that. So we know there are people within the Ukrainian service that are saying we think that there are people that were trying to help Hillary Clinton. We know there are people that are saying we think that they were listening to Joe Biden, and we know there are people that are saying, no, we think the other side's corrupt as well. So you basically have at least two factions going back and forth. All the more reason for the United States to have an investigation into Joe Biden demanding the prosecutor of his son be fired. But what the left wants to do is they want to say, no. Everyone who's on our side of this issue is telling the truth, and everyone who's not is a far right-wing extremist Donald Trump lover that's just lying to you. That's garbage. The specifics are important, don't get me wrong, but just think of this case at the most base value. A sitting president or vice president, whatever, is involved with the country, in part deciding if they get huge sums of money working to solve corruption. His son is accused, or is definitely working on the board of one of these corrupt people that the country's after. So a U.S. official threatens to withhold $1 billion of tax money if they don't get rid of the prosecutor who happens to be looking into his son. I don't care the party affiliation, the specific politicians' names. That warrants an investigation. That warrants huge media scrutiny. That warrants congressional oversight, people looking into what's going on here. Period. None of that occurred. None of it. Even when the media admits years later, yes, that was a huge conflict of interest. None of it occurred. It's corrupt. To this day, they're saying, well, no, it's not a big deal. And this Intercept article is the worst of the worst. So after I go through the whole thing and basically just do what I've been talking about an hour here as well, after I go through this whole thing in writing, in a 50-minute video, this is what people say to me, right? They say, oh yeah, here's, like I said, here's an article that proves you're wrong. The Intercept article, they provide it. Or they don't even read and they provide the same PolitiFact article I just went through for an hour. Yep, there you go, you're wrong. Why? Because you just click copy and paste on an article I just shredded? So the Intercept article, okay, fine, I'd go through it too. Now the Intercept article, you might be shocked to find, defends Biden in two ways. Can you guess? Can you guess what the two ways are? The first thing it says is, actually, there's no proof that this investigator was actually looking into Biden's son in the first place. Wait a minute, didn't I cover that in the PolitiFact article? Yeah, I did. I actually did cover that. And then the second argument, this one's going to blow your mind, right? You know what the second argument is? Well, actually, a bunch of people said that they wanted to fire this prosecutor for other reasons anyways. Oh yeah, I covered that too. But somehow just clicking copy and paste, that's it. That answers everything. Those aren't arguments. Even if I grant 100% those two arguments, that's still not a reason not to investigate. Again, put Trump's name in instead of Biden. Trump fires a prosecutor or offers offers $1 billion if they fire a prosecutor looking into his son. Is it sufficient to say, well, actually, there were a lot of people recommending Trump get that guy fired for tons of reasons anyways? Is that sufficient? Would that be enough for the media and the Democrats to say, oh, yeah, no corruption there? No, it would warrant an investigation. It's that simple. You could cite, I don't care, you could bring Neil deGrasse Tyson on and Bill Nye the Science Guy to do some sex junk songs about how, oh, actually, Shokin was a really bad dude. Here, let's do a little dance. Shokin's a bad dude. Gotta get rid of him. Okay, I don't care. It proves nothing. There still should have been an investigation. It's that simple. We know that these people in the Ukraine, we're told all the time, it's the central argument that Biden's team's making. They can't be trusted. They're corrupt. We know for a fact that it wasn't until that prosecutor went that the case against Biden's son was finally buried. We know that the new prosecutor said, wow, that was hugely problematic. A guy that Biden called solid and said, this case was buried and now we're looking at it. It seems like there's stuff going on. And by the way, I forgot to add this before I get to the Intercept article. It says, quoting, Ukraine is in the middle of a hard-fought presidential election, is a frequent target of intelligence operations by neighboring Russia, and suffers from rampant political corruption. Thus, many Americans might take the restart of the Burisma case with a grain of salt, and rightfully so. Okay, so basically Solomon's admitting, look, we're not saying take anyone at face value here. Solomon says, but what makes Lutsenko's account compelling is that federal authorities in America, in an entirely different case, uncovered financial records showing just how much Hunter Biden and Archer, remember, Archer was John Kerry's son's friend, who started this relationship with Hunter Biden, got him involved in Burisma, showing just how much Hunter Biden and Archer's company, Rosencept, which we talked about, or Rosemont, I'm sorry, received from Burisma while Joe Biden acted as Obama's point man in Ukraine. Between April 2014 and October 2015, more than $3 million was paid out of Burisma accounts to an account linked to Biden and Archer's Rosemont Seneca firm, according to financial records placed in a federal court file in Manhattan in an unrelated case against Archer. The bank records show that on most months when Burisma money flowed, 2 wire transfers of $83,333 each were sent to the Rosemont Seneca connected account on the same day. The same Rosemont Seneca link account typically then would pay Hunter Biden one or more payments ranging from $5,000 to $25,000 each. Prosecutors reviewed internal company documents and wanted to interview Hunter Biden and Archer about why they had received such payments. Lutsenko, again the Ukrainian prosecutor, said Ukrainian company board members legally can pay themselves for work they do if it benefits the company's bottom line. But prosecutors never got to determine the merits of the payment to Rosemont because of the way the investigation was shut down. Now, do you understand what's going on? There's corruption. The guy who owns this company is accused of corruption. He's accused of having like this shell corporation and using it to funnel all kinds of illegal money. And the people that are on the board of this company are getting paid massive amounts of money. One of them's Hunter Biden. And so prosecutors wanted to look at the money to make sure that it was on the up and up, that these weren't shady payments or illegal monies going to them. The current prosecutor is saying, that's what's occurring. We want to look at this money, but we never got a chance. And the Biden defenders are saying, it's all hogwash. But then a separate U.S. investigation backs up what the Ukrainian prosecutor is saying, because it does show, yes, what was Hunter Biden doing? $3 million went to his company. What was Hunter Biden doing to get one or more payments a month of $5,000 to $25,000 for this company? What was he doing on the board to warrant that kind of money? Those are sums so big, it automatically raises some eyebrows. What's going on here? Now, when you take into account that we know that everyone, the Ukrainians and the United States, say that the owner of that company is horribly corrupt and funneling all sorts of corrupt illegal money through it, all of a sudden eyebrows are really raised. Yet we're told, leave it alone. That story was just buried. It was being looked at. Whether it was being looked at or not, the case was still open. When the previous prosecutor was there, that prosecutor was forced to be fired by Joe Biden. And then the case got shut down by people connected to the U.S. Embassy in the Ukraine. Now, the prosecutor that Biden called solid says, actually, there was still a lot of money we never got to look at. We'd like to look at it. Biden's team and all the media says, no, that's not true. But it turns out, according to a U.S. investigation, yes, that is true. So we're not just taking Lutsenko's word for it. Now we come to the Intercept article. Now, the Intercept article, as I said, it's just going to be a bunch of people. It's indignant. But that's the way a lot of these, the media treats Trump. These rabid anti-Trump people. I don't care. I'll still read the facts of the article. But it's just, it seethes with animosity and arrogance. I'll just read some of it to you. You can see what I mean. Viral rumors that Joe Biden abuses power as vice president to protect his son's business interests in Ukraine, which spread last week from pro-Trump media ecosystem to the New York Times, are absolute nonsense, according to Ukraine's leading anti-corruption activists. The evaluation is backed by foreign correspondents in Kiev after Biden's outreach to the Ukraine in 2014. In an interview with The Intercept, Daria Kaluniak, an American-educated lawyer who founded Ukraine's Anti-Corruption Action Center, expressed frustration that 2 recent front-page stories at the New York Times on how the conspiracy is being used to attack Biden failed to properly debunk the false accusation. According to Kaluniak, a former anti-corruption prosecutor, there's simply no truth to the rumors spreading like wildfire across the internet. Well, of course there is. She admits that Biden's son worked for this corrupt person. She admits that looked shady. She admits that Biden said, I'm not going to give you this $1 billion unless you fire this guy. She just makes the argument, 1, this guy wasn't really looking into anything, and 2, that he was corrupt and should have been fired anyways. That's not just rumors and accusations. That's truth. So it's not just rumors spreading like wildfire across the internet. It's actual facts. She goes on. The accusation is that Biden blackmailed Ukraine's new leaders into firing the country's chief prosecutor, Shokin, to derail an investigation he was leading into a Ukrainian gas company the vice president's son was paid to advise. The truth, Kaluniak said, is that Shokin was forced from office at Biden's urging because he had failed to conduct thorough investigations of corruption and stifled efforts to investigate embezzlement and misconduct by public officials following the 2014 uprising. Okay, the same thing that the PolitiFact article said. But just another expert saying, yeah, this guy was a bad prosecutor. Okay, that's not proof of anything. Properly debunking this particular conspiracy theory is easier said than done, though, since it is set in Ukraine, a country with a Byzantine political intrigue in the best of times. The rivalries between the political factions are so intense, the country's new anti-corruption agencies are in each other's throat. Okay, all the more reason. So this author admits this, but says, but I just talked to one person from one faction of it, and so now I know the truth. These are all just far right-wing conspiracies. Wouldn't you, if you had any integrity whatsoever, go, like John Solomon says? What's John Solomon says? He says, we shouldn't take Lutsenko's word for it. But it's backed up by further facts that occurred in the United States. That's not what this author does. This author just says, yep, I've taken a side. We know that these two sides are each other's throat, but one side's right and the other side's wrong. And so everything's a wild conspiracy theory if you don't believe me. Moving on. There's no question that Biden did, during a visit to Kiev last 2015, threaten to withhold $1 billion in loan guarantees unless Shokin was dismissed. But the vice president, who was leading the Obama administration's effort to fight corruption in the Ukraine, that sentence really insane, isn't it? His son is working with one of the corrupt people that Biden's supposed to be advocating against. Do you see? And then, by the way, that's the definition of conflict of interest. And then Biden acts on that conflict by having the prosecutor fired, which resulted in the case against that corrupt oligarch being dropped. Did the country face... But the vice president did the country a favor by hastening Shokin's departure, Kaluniak said, since he had failed to properly investigate corrupt officials. Her quoted, Shokin was fired because he attacked the reformers within the prosecutor's general office, reformers who tried to investigate corrupt prosecutors. We'll skip this section. To illustrate what he called rot in the prosecutor's office, Kramer cited a notorious example known in the Ukraine case as the diamond prosecutors, of which troves of diamonds and other cash valuables were found in the homes of two of Shokin's subordinates, with no reasons given. Among the most prominent cases of official corruption Shokin had failed to prosecute was against Yanukovych's environment with Natural Resources Minister Mykola Zlochevsky, who had oversight of the Ukrainian energy firms, including the largest gas company, Burisma. Sound familiar? Yes, this is the guy that Hunter Biden worked for. Was on the board of directors of this company, Burisma. Don't leave the names for you, they're difficult. There's this guy, he's a corrupt oligarch. This article's admitting it. This really corrupt dude. He wasn't being investigated enough, they say. Biden's son was working for him. Got it? Okay. Which he secretly controlled through shell companies in Cyprus. After Zlochevsky was forced from office along with Yanukovych in 2014, his gas company appointed Hunter Biden to its board. Shokin was fired, Kaluniak served, because he failed to do investigations of corruption and economic crimes of President Yanukovych and his close associates, including Zlochevsky. And basically, it was a big demand within society in Ukraine, including our organization and many other organizations, to get rid of this guy. Now, if it was a big demand inside the Ukraine to get rid of this guy, why was there hesitancy, according to Biden himself, right, to get rid of the guy? They didn't get rid of him until Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion. This woman's saying, oh, the whole country wanted rid of the guy. There was a huge demand to get rid of him. But the government didn't get rid of him until Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion. Both of those things can't be simultaneously true. And keep in mind what she's saying here. What was the prosecutor's big crime? Why did he need to be fired by Biden? Well, he needed to be fired because he wasn't looking into corrupt officials like Hunter Biden's boss, Zlochevsky. Right? Okay, keep that in mind. Moving on. By getting Shokin removed, Biden in fact made it more rather than less likely that the oligarch who employed his son would be subject to prosecution for corruption. This is a startling sentence because this woman, she's a big anti-corruption leader. Keep in mind, this article was written in May 10th, 2019, right? So 4 years after the incident. She's saying, actually, the chances of this Zlochevsky guy actually being investigated are better now that that prosecutor was fired. 4 years later, this woman knows damn well that the investigation was buried, but she doesn't breathe word one about it in this article. Now, if you were truly someone who was unbiased, and you're just trying to be straight down the middle with the facts, wouldn't you say, and it's to my great chagrin that we fired this former prosecutor, who at least still had the case open and was on paper, and immediately the case was dropped against Zlochevsky. Wouldn't she say that if she's really concerned about corruption with Zlochevsky? Isn't that something she would say? But she doesn't breathe a word of it. She never mentions it. They just act like Biden did the right thing. He got rid of this corrupt guy and finally justice will prevail. End of story. Oh yeah, justice didn't prevail. Because they kicked it off to an agency that was connected to the American embassy and then they didn't do anything. Moving on, as the former Reuters correspondent Bolo explains in his book Moneyland, just weeks before Hunter Biden joined Burisma board in 2014, ostensibly to strengthen the corporate governance, Britain's serious fraud offense had frozen $23 million of Zlochevsky's assets in a money laundering investigation. At the time, Bolo writes, the White House insisted that the position was private matter for Hunter Biden unrelated to his father's job. But that is not how anyone I spoke to in the Ukraine interpreted it. Hunter Biden is an undistinguished corporate lawyer with no previous Ukraine experience. Why would they hire him? Indeed, hiring the vice president's son might have seemed to Zlochevsky like a way to protect his business from scrutiny by international investigators. But the facts show that the Obama-Biden administration strenuously opposed the decision by Ukrainian prosecutors to let Zlochevsky off the hook. Really? They strenuously opposed it. Can you show me what they did after the case was buried? Nothing. They demanded this first prosecutor be fired. Was there anything Obama did 2015, 2016 when they buried the case? Can anyone find that article? Oh, that didn't happen. Is this woman in 2019 that's being interviewed that says it was a good thing this prosecutor got fired because this Zlochevsky was corrupt and he had no reason to hire Biden and it seems like there was some really shady stuff going on? Is she speaking up about how the case was just buried? No, she's not. But this is a source we're supposed to trust it. It's for this reason. It's for this reason that we don't need to look like Biden did anything shady. No further need to investigate Biden's son. No further need to investigate Biden demanding his prosecutor be fired. Threatening $1 billion of U.S. tax dollars. Now remember, at this point, if I could convince you, remember to go back and think just the bare bones of the story. You have a senior official, president or vice president, who's in charge of getting rid of corruption in the country. That official's son is working with one of the very corrupt people that you're supposed to be going after. You threaten $1 billion of tax dollars that's to be given to those people unless they fire the prosecutor who's in charge of going after your son's company. They do fire that prosecutor, and then the case is promptly buried, never to be heard from again. Now a new prosecutor is saying, not only does everyone admit, even the people defending Biden, yes, this looks really shady. Biden's son had no qualifications. Biden's son was getting payments multiple times a month of $50,000 to $25,000. Looks really shady. U.S. investigators have found out that there's shady things. And even the prosecutor that was replaced, that was considered solid by Biden, is now saying, whoa, this investigation was buried. We never got a chance to look into all these funds that were going to Hunter Biden. Despite all that, we're supposed to say, no need for an investigation. No need to look into this. No, Biden actually helped solve corruption by getting the prosecutor looking into it fired. That's beyond me. That's just the face value of it. Now, when we look at the specifics, when I tell you specifically, why isn't this woman that's in charge of anti-corruption in Ukraine saying, by the way, Zlochevsky still gets away with it to this day. And then other agency, the NABU, that's connected to the U.S. Embassy, they buried the story. Why isn't she saying that? Here's another person. Vitaly Kasko, a former deputy prosecutor who resigned in 2016 and accused Shokin's office of being a hotbed of corruption, told Bola that he had tried and failed to get his colleagues of the prosecutor's general office to offer proper assistance to the British inquiry in 2014. But the British investigation was eventually stymied because Ukrainian prosecutors failed to provide a court with evidence that the $23 million, the proceeds from the sale of an oil storage facility Zlochevsky owned via a shell company in British Virgin Islands, were related to a criminal abuse of office by the former natural resource minister. You hear that? They're saying that actually the case failed because they didn't provide evidence, this Shokin prosecutor, to this British case, right? That's what they're saying. Now, let me go back and remind you of something. So they get rid of this guy. Now things are different, right? Now they're actually going to work with the British and get things done. Now that it was this corrupt prosecutor Biden wanted out. Now they'll get to the bottom of it. Let's go back to the Hill 1 second. requote here, most of the general prosecutor's investigative work on Burisma focused on 3 separate cases, and most stopped abruptly once Shokin was fired. The most prominent of the Burisma case was transferred to a different Ukrainian agency, closely aligned with the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, known as the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of the Ukraine. Real quick, isn't that where this woman works? The first woman? Oh no, it's a little different. Anti-Corruption Action Center. Anyways, moving on here. The NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, that's who's now investigating this case, closed that case, and a second case involving alleged improper money transfers in London. The case we're talking about here, right? You see? They said we had to get rid of this corrupt prosecutor because they weren't working with London officials with this $23 million in a UK-owned territory. Money transfers in London was dropped when Ukrainian officials failed to file the necessary documents required by the deadline. So they got rid of this prosecutor because he wasn't working with the British. And look, this article, right? They're all over it. Had to get rid of that prosecutor, didn't work with the British. And they failed to report, oh, by the way, it wasn't until after that person left that the new agency looking at it just straight up didn't file paperwork. And so the case got dismissed. How could they leave that out of this article? So no, getting rid of that prosecutor, maybe that prosecutor wasn't looking into things as he should have been. That's very possible. But certainly it wasn't completely buried until after Biden demanded that prosecutor be removed. New reporting from this is from the Intercept again. New reporting from Bloomberg News this week revealed that the 2014 case against Zlochevsky was assigned to Shokin and then a deputy prosecutor, but Shokin and others weren't pursuing it, according to internal reports from Ukrainian prosecutor's office reviewed by Bloomberg. So they act like, right? They act like this London case was totally shut down while Shokin was there, and so they fired Shokin. The reality is the case just wasn't moving at a pace they wanted, but it was still open. It wasn't officially closed until after Shokin was removed. But the article is misleading you. In December 2014, U.S. officials threatened Ukrainian prosecutors that there would be consequences if they failed to assist the British investigation, according to documents obtained by Bloomberg. Instead, the Ukrainian prosecutors provided a letter to Zlochevsky's lawyer stating that they knew of no evidence that the foreign minister had been involved in embezzlement. The British investigation collapsed soon after that, and the funds were unfrozen and quickly moved to Cyprus. They don't mention that it was after. They didn't meet the deadline after the prosecutor was gone. Casco, the former deputy prosecutor, told Bloomberg News that there was no truth to the accusation that Biden or anyone in the Obama administration had tried to block the investigation into Zlochevsky. There was no pressure from anyone from the U.S. to close cases against Zlochevsky, Casco said. It was shelved by Ukrainian prosecutors in 2014 and through 2015. Now, when was it specifically? Let's see if I can find this, because it might be important. I don't know it now, but when specifically did, it'll be something I'll look at later, because I'm just... Let me see, interviews happened... So this guy actually got done in 2016, but according to Solomon, so the Intercept article is saying that the investigation was shut down in 2014 through 2015, but Solomon's saying that it actually wasn't until after that. On our center's website, Kaluniak has been working to debunk a series of conspiratorial stories about supposed Ukrainian collusion in the 2016 election, which have been embraced by Trump and his lawyer Giuliani. Those stories are true, by the way. But I digress. So you can see where Kaluniak's coming from. She's on the side of it doesn't matter that Ukrainian officials gave Hillary Clinton the DNC information that directly was used against Paul Manafort. This is what she says. What I'm pissed off about is that Shokin, who was totally corrupt, who undermined the reform of prosecution reformers, and who didn't want an investigation into Zlochevsky, now appears in the New York Times as a hero who wanted to investigate Zlochevsky and Burisma, who suffered because Joe Biden demanded to dismiss him because of his willingness to investigate Burisma, which is absolute nonsense. Compounding her frustration is that she was interviewed for the Times story, but it focused more on potential harm the anti-Biden conspiracy theory could inflict on his presidential candidacy than on making it clear that Shokin was fired because of his failure to properly investigate suspected corruption, included by Zlochevsky. How do they know that? If that's why he was fired, why didn't it happen until Biden threatened $1 billion? If he was just fired because the government of Ukraine said, yeah, this guy's corrupt, all she's doing is repeating Biden's claims. She says, I was in the Ukraine, I saw how corrupt this guy was. Okay, picture this in your head. She's in the Ukraine, she sees that this guy's corrupt, supposedly. She says, I want the guy fired. But Biden admits, despite everyone saying that, the Ukrainian government was like, no, we're not going to fire this guy. And so it came to the last day where he said, I'm leaving in 6 hours unless you fire this guy and you're not getting your $1 billion. Go ahead, call Obama. He's cool with it. That's what he said, right? That's what Biden said. And he said, son of a bitch, they fired him. So the reason he got fired wasn't because he was corrupt. The reason he got fired was because $1 billion were on the table. So the question isn't why he was fired. The question is, why did Biden want him fired? So all of this woman's claims, well, he did this and he did that, and that's why we fired him, are garbage. Unless she knows the mind of Joe Biden, she doesn't know. She knows why she wanted him fired. She knows why other people wanted to say they want him fired. But she doesn't know if Joe Biden's son being investigated was part of that calculus or not in Joe Biden's mind. She doesn't know. And this is just a conspiracy. It pisses me off that people are saying this. Kalaniak's fear that the Times report would be taken as confirmation Biden had acted improperly seemed to be realized by a viral tweet promoting the story from Ken Vogel, the Washington correspondent who wrote it, which claims the Bidens are entangled in a Ukraine corruption scandal. Kalaniak was distressed by the Times report and Vogel's tweet promoting it failed to clearly debunk the false claim that the prosecutor Joe Biden got fired to open a case into a company that was paying Hunter Biden. In fact, Kasko and Kalaniak noted Shokin had undermined efforts to investigate the company and its owner. Okay, then presumably if that's the case, then after he was out, the owner got investigated. Because these two people, both Kasko and Kalaniak and Biden and Christine Lagarde and all the other people said, we want this guy out because we know that this Zlochevsky guy that Hunter Biden was working for is corrupt. And this investigations into him are being stymied. So they got rid of the guy and all the investigations died. Nothing happened. And none of them mention it. After he was appointed prosecutor general in 2015, Kalaniak said Shokin's office did formally open another investigation into Zlochevsky, but that was done at the request of the country's parliament, not the chief prosecutor. Okay, so he opened a case into the guy. In 2015, a review of the court documents by Kalaniak suggested that the only investigative step in that case was to transfer the files to another agency. During Shokin's tenure, American diplomats in Kiev publicly complained about the prosecutor's failure to investigate Hunter Biden's employer, Zlochevsky, calling in evidence the prosecutor general's office was in dire need of reform. Quote, we have learned that there have been times that the PGO not only did not support investigations into corruption, but rather undermined the prosecutors working on legislative corruption cases, U.S. Ambassador Pyatt said in a speech at the forum in 2015. For example, in the case of Economic Minister Zlochevsky, the UK authorities had seized $23 million in illicit assets that belonged to the Ukrainian people. Officials at the PGO office were asked by the UK to send documents supporting the seizure. Instead, they sent letters to Zlochevsky's attorneys attesting there was no case against him. As a result, the money was freed by the UK court, and shortly thereafter, the money was moved to Cyprus. Pyatt added that the prosecutors responsible subverting the case by authorizing those letters should at the minimum be terminated. Okay, so then I'm sure that Mr. Pyatt spoke up afterwards how the investigations were never carried out and were finally buried after they got rid of that prosecutor. Oh, wait, no. That didn't happen. Hunter Biden's presence on the board of the Ukrainian company suspected of corruption first became a political issue 3 months later in December 2015 when his father visited Kiev and threatened to withhold financial aid unless the prosecutor general was fired. As Verizon reported in the Times that month, the vice president's spokesman insisted that younger Biden's business in Ukraine would not influence his father's determination to push for more vigorous enforcement of anti-corruption laws. Although there's no evidence that Joe Biden did anything to shield Burisma from scrutiny, the fact that he failed to dissuade his son from helping to launder the reputation of a Ukrainian company widely suspected of corruption is hardly praiseworthy. The former vice president said he simply never discussed his son's business in the Ukraine. The bad news for Biden is the false nature of the allegation about his role in Ukraine won't stop Trump and his supporters from treating it like a major scandal, hoping to tarnish the Democrat currently leading the race in the 2020 election. And since the setting for the supposed scandal is part of the world few Americans have much knowledge of, it could be hard to refute claims in the minds just like John Kerry's Vietnam War record or Hillary Clinton's role in the Benghazi. Yeah, well, I don't know about John Kerry's war record, but yeah, we do know what happened in Benghazi. Hillary Clinton was corrupt. They spread a lie that it was about a video when they knew it was actual terrorism because they didn't want to admit that there was a terrorist attack on their watch right before an election. As Pfeiffer, a former communication director for Obama, explained in a recent episode of Pod Save America, flooding the internet with baseless conspiracy theories unfortunately be good politics. Isn't that what the Russia investigation was? This is how Trump won, Pfeiffer said, which is feed conspiracy theories to the base. Just throw so much shit around that folks in the middle say, well, it's all confusing. I don't know who's right. I don't really have any way of finding out. Certainly the media isn't capable of telling me, so I'm going to default my natural expectations, which is both sides are corrupt liars. And when the public thinks both sides are corrupt liars, that ignores the advantage of the corrupt liar in the race. What absolute garbage. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It happened. If it was Trump, Pfeiffer, and all these Obama people that are being cited here would be saying, grill him! Where's the investigation? He offered $1 billion to fire the prosecutor looking into his son? They wouldn't accept, but that prosecutor was really crappy. They wouldn't accept that as an answer. You see what I mean? How seething with just anger and garbage this is? It's not just, you saw John Solomon. He's straight down the middle. I'm sure he has his biases, but he's like, look, here's the arguments on one side. Here's the arguments on the other. Here's what we know in the U.S. that kind of backs up one side of these arguments. Reason enough to investigate for sure. This side this is what they do. Anytime there's any, it's just a conspiracy theory that Trump was spied on. It's just a conspiracy theory. How dare Trump? He ought to be ashamed to say something like that. Oh, it turns out Trump was spied. Oh, it's just a conspiracy theory to say that the FBI would act inappropriate towards Trump. Now we know the IG says that they broke policy, at least two of their leaders, Comey and McCabe, and broke the law in my opinion, but for whatever reason barred it and prosecute. Oh, it's, it's not a conspiracy. The Steele dossier, the P dossier, yeah, that happened. Trump's an agent of Russia. That stuff's real. But can you believe the conspiracy theories the other side spreads? This isn't a conspiracy theory. Again, I don't know how many times I can say this. They are partly right here. This quote, it gets so confusing. I don't know who's right. I don't have any way of finding out. The media doesn't tell me. So I'm just going to say both sides are corrupt. That's true. And it definitely becomes confusing. That's the problem. The average person is not a nerd like me and doesn't have the time to sit around and look into this stuff. But when you look into it, what you start to see is it's a real simple story. Most of these stories are real simple. Like, let's take the Hillary server situation, right? Here's all you need to know, right? We could talk about, well, what does the language of the law say? Is intent necessary? Blah, blah, blah. Well, were the documents classified before or after? Blah, 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 right? It gets very confusing. Let's make this real simple, right? Congress says, we're subpoenaing a bunch of emails from you, Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton says, okay. And then her tech guy gets on Reddit that night and says, hey, I need to get a very important person's name off an email chain. Can you help me? And people say no. And then the next day, he destroys all that evidence. Hillary Clinton's team had emails subpoenaed by Congress. After they were subpoenaed, Hillary's team destroyed them. That's simple to understand. That's a crime. That's obstruction of justice. If evidence is subpoenaed by you and they say, we want all of your emails related to your work, and you say, okay, and you destroy all of your emails and say, it's cool, I was going to delete them. I had them in a pile to delete them anyways, and I just got around to it today. And trust me, none of them were about work anyways. You think that's going to fly? You think you're going to be all right? That's a crime. Simple. So many people make the mistake, and don't get me wrong, it's worth talking about the minutia and the actual specifics, right? It is, and I like talking about that stuff. But if you're a person out there, that's all you need to know. Now you can start spinning it. Well, actually, they had these poly emails, and that's the way it works. Sometimes, one person just doesn't communicate properly to another person, and this happens. It doesn't matter. None of those excuses matter. Everybody knows if you delete subpoenaed evidence, it is not an excuse to keep you out of jail to say, well, actually, I was going to delete them anyways. That's ridiculous. In this situation, I don't care. You could cite all the people you want that say this prosecutor was really crappy. I'll concede that point. I don't know if it's true or not, but fine, I'll concede it. Joe Biden's son worked for someone that everyone says was corrupt. He wasn't qualified. He got tons of money that we still know that was never investigated in the course of that. His dad was supposed to be ferreting out corruption. His dad threatened to withhold $1 billion unless they fired the prosecutor that was looking into his son's company. After that person was fired, even though you could read tons of articles by these ladies in this article, they seem very smart, don't they? Very articulate about how once this prosecutor was the impediment, once this prosecutor's out of the way, finally, Zlochevsky, Hunter Biden's boss at this company, finally he'll be brought to justice. But he wasn't. It was buried. That's it. That's simple. His son was being looked at for serious crimes by a prosecutor. We don't know how well the prosecutor was doing. We don't know if the prosecutor would have brought charges. We don't know if the prosecutor was just sitting around eating donuts. But Joe Biden knew this was the guy looking into his son. And Joe Biden said, here's $1 billion if you fire that guy. And they did fire him, and then the case against Biden's son was buried. That is cut and dry, period. If it was Trump, it would be a national outrage. That's it. And this guy's right. Pfeiffer's right. But it's them. They're like, if we just confuse people enough, they'll say, that's just so confusing, I don't understand it. It's that simple. Now, do I look like someone who's going to shy away from the specifics? No. I love going through these articles line by line and talking about them. Right? Like, if these people are right, then why didn't Zlochevsky finally get what was coming to him? Maybe he wasn't as corrupt as they said, and so the prosecutor shouldn't have been fired by Biden. Is that it? Was he innocent? No, they still say he was corrupt. Okay, well then that's out. Then what's the explanation? The group that they got handed off to, that was working with the U.S. Embassy, they were corrupt too? Well, that sounds bad. So it went from one corrupt guy to corrupt people that Biden knew better, and those people just happened to bury the case against his son? Huh. That's odd, don't you think? If these women are so serious, and all the people that were saying, oh, this prosecutor needed to be fired so we can finally get Zlochevsky, why haven't they spoke up in the 4 years since when Zlochevsky got off the hook? Or 3.5. 2016, Shokin was fired. Where have they been? Why haven't they spoke up? I just want to get to this bottom part. Giuliani shrugged off the suggestion there might be something wrong with encouraging a foreign government to investigate the American president's political rivals. We're not meddling in an election, we're meddling in an investigation we should have the right to do. Remember, no problem with Obama working with the UK and Australia to spy on Trump. No problem with that. This is an actual crime. Remember when I read you from the Solomon piece at the Hill? That actually they found this money from Biden and his co-worker, his friend that got him the job, or that was working with him as the director at Burisma. They actually found out that Burisma was sending them all this money. So in a separate investigation, they found, hey, that other investigation, it turns out that here's evidence that we didn't look at. So it's an ongoing U.S. investigation. They have the right to go to another country and say, we want your information on this investigation. Absolutely. Did the Obama administration have the right to go to other countries and ask if they had information if Trump was engaged in some kind of criminal conspiracy? Sure. They went further. They did so based on unverified claims. They had those organizations seek to spy and entrap Trump's people, which is criminal and Obama should be brought down for. But of course they have every right to look into actual credible accusations of crimes. Of course they do. Was Obama just supposed to say, oh, we heard that Trump was dealing with Russia, but our hands are tied. It would be unethical for us to look into anything. Of course not. Everyone says the exact opposite. The problem was the way they went about with it, and they didn't actually have evidence. They had DNC paid for garbage that they never verified, and then they encouraged spying based on that. The fact that a Times reporter described Biden as entangled in a Ukrainian corruption scandal has been treated as confirmation by Trump supporters and the far-right media outlets that work to boost him that the allegation's true. Before it reached the Times, friendly speculation about Biden and the supposed meddling in 2016 anti-corruption prosecutors in Ukraine was regularly featured on a network of far-right websites that work to boost Trump. Among the first outlets was Ukrainians as meddlers with Sputnik, Russian state-owned news, all those dastardly Russians again. That theme related to conspiracy theories about the Ukrainian Democrats were then featured on a series of opinion columns by John Solomon, a columnist for The Hill. Solomon's stories based on interviews with disgruntled far-right Ukrainian officials who had previously been featured in Sputnik have been embraced by the conspiracy theorist-in-chief. What great journalism. Does that sound how an independent journalism would talk? Conspiracy theorist-in-chief? Now, isn't it funny that this guy's point is, all the people that report on this are far-right conspiracy theorists that just want to help Trump out? Okay, but this is what we've become. So can I say, well, this article is garbage because it's from a Russia hoax pushing, hate Trump at any given way, thinks Kavanaugh was guilty based on no evidence, far left maniac? No, I still looked at his facts. I don't just write it off and say, oh, you're a left-wing nut, screw you, I'm not going to listen to you. But that's what he does to the right. The Biden conspiracy theory has been heavily promoted by the Epoch Times, which is owned by members of the Chinese Falun Gong spiritual movement and is virulently pro-Trump. As Biden's former chief of staff noted, records of political spending online show that the Epoch Times has even paid to spread the conspiracy theory on Facebook. Do you see how... This was the article that was cited. Oh, that disproves everything that I've done. Now, Joe, that's funny that you should bring that up, right? So I said there were two arguments that I got against this, right? The first was, oh, here's an article, this proves that everything you're saying is wrong. The second argument, Joe, believe it or not, is, well, good, we don't like Biden, so get rid of him. This will help Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. But that's not really looking at this critically, though. It could. But it's not just an indictment of Joe Biden, right? It clearly also indicts the Obama administration, without a doubt. Biden was part of it. Biden admits, by his own admission, that call Obama, he said, those sons of bitches before they fired him. Remember? That's what he said. That's what Biden said. Obama was clearly in this. Obama, and isn't it funny, anytime anything comes up like this with Obama, he goes, oh, geez, I was unaware of that until I read it in the media like everyone else. That's Biden's take. I didn't know my son worked for a corrupt oligarch until I read about it in the media. But we know that, as I showed in the Sullivan piece, actually, Biden's office 4 months before Biden made his threat was answering questions to the New York Times knowing his son worked for this company and was under investigation. So, clearly Obama's involved with this as well. But it's more than just Biden and Obama. It is the entire establishment. The Democratic establishment, the Republican establishment that goes on board that are never Trumpers, the media that are just mouthpieces for that establishment. Just take all the facts of this out. Just take this. Even the pieces I read defending Biden, saying, well, it's a conspiracy theory against him. Even those ones said this was a huge conflict of interest that was really bad for Biden. Even they said that. Do you remember them saying that in 2014? You remember them saying that in 2015? You remember them saying it in 16? No, they didn't say anything. They didn't say anything when it mattered, when it was actually occurring. They wait until 5 years later and go, oh yeah, that was bad. They covered it up then. That's the media we're supposed to trust, by the way, when they say, we've heard things about a whistleblower. We can't tell you, but trust us, Trump's evil and bad. We need to get rid of him. That's the same media. The same people. Now, you might say, oh, okay, well, maybe some of the Dems and the establishment and the media, they didn't know about this story. Where are they today? I'm just some fat guy in a chair. I'm talking about it. I can see the blatant corruption. You ask me 10 years from now, I will guarantee you ask me, hey, did you hear the vice president's son is working with this guy that's being investigated for corruption over in Russia or China? Oh, yeah, really? Yeah, and then check this out. The vice president actually threatened to withhold $1 billion unless the prosecutor that's supposedly on paper the one who's supposed to be in charge of that investigation is fired. I'd say, what? Are you serious? Yeah, that needs to be investigated. I'm going to turn on the 6 o'clock news. It's going to be on there, right? That's an incredible story. Nope, not in this case. Every single media outlet that's anti-Trump is, oh, well, I didn't do anything wrong. And if they have to, Joe, you're right. What they'll do is they'll cut ties. They'll be like, yeah, it was just Biden. It wasn't us. It wasn't us, the media. It wasn't Obama. It wasn't the Democrats. It's just Biden. Biden. This might affect him in the general election. We better go with Elizabeth. Warren's going to win anyways, but that's what's going to happen. By the way, if you go back and you check some of my live streams I did with my friend Drone Tech when we were making predictions during the second Democrat debate, I said Warren will win, and if Biden wins, one of the big things he'll have to face is this Ukrainian scandal is going to blow up. It's exactly what I said and predicted. So this might be used as an excuse to get Biden out, but don't fall for it. That's garbage. The media covered this up. The Democrats and the establishment covered this up. And again, dual party. If there are Republicans that are saying this isn't worth investigating, they're corrupt too. It's just... no one. I challenge. And if you know anyone, if you ever want to do a video with me, by the way, it's real simple. All you have to do is have a Gmail account. You don't even have to have a camera. You could just do audio if you have a microphone. Even if you disagree with me, I'm not going to be a jerk to you. I think that's evident. I do stuff with my friend Basic Thoughts, who's left-wing. I do stuff with my friends in real life that are left-wing. I think I'm polite to them. So if you ever want to do a video with me about subjects, I would love to do it. But if you know anyone out there that disagrees with me, that this isn't a story by, I would love to talk to them. Because all I get from people is like, here's an article, you're wrong. That's not an answer. Or they'll say, they'll say, well, actually, I know you thought you're right, but here, wait, actually, let me tell you. Darya Kaluniak, she says you're wrong, so. That's it. You're wrong. Darya Kaluniak says that, so you're wrong. She says, actually, this guy was fired because he was corrupt. Okay, so she knows Joe Biden's mind? No matter what we say at the end of the day, right? Can we at least admit this? No matter how confident I am what Biden did or why Biden acted the way he did, we know what Biden did, right? We don't know the why. We don't. We know what he did. We know how he did it. We know when he did it. We don't know why he did it. No one does except Biden, or that's basically it. So when someone says, here's my credentials and I'm from the Ukraine and I'm anti-corruption and I know why Biden fired this guy, or I know why the Ukraine fired him. I know why the Ukraine fired him. I can answer that. That's simple. Because they wanted $1 billion. Easy enough. You know how I know that? Because they didn't fire him. And Biden said, you have 6 hours to fire him or you're not getting this $1 billion. And then they did fire him. So that, pretty clear cut, they fired him because they wanted that $1 billion. So then the question is, why did Biden want him fired? Because he's the one who forced the action. This Kalaniak lady doesn't know. And you could say this guy was corrupt and this and that and the other. It warrants an investigation. It is improper. It was a conflict of interest for Biden's son to be there in the first place. And any reasonable person could look at that and say, I don't care what you say how bad this dude was. The fact that he was in charge of the investigation against Biden's son means that there is definitely a conflict of interest and Biden had no business involved in that situation whatsoever. And he has no fault but his own that people are skeptical. It's not wild conspiracy theories. And it should be looked into. And if Trump did this, he would be impeached. It is the definition of nepotism and corruption. You can't do that. Any other organization, you had a leader financially threaten another organization to fire someone because that organization was investigating their son. Any organization, I don't care what, you'd be like, that sounds incredibly corrupt. Yeah, but it turns out that other organization sucked. Okay, it still sounds corrupt. And that's where we stand. No one has I haven't heard any answers. It just, here's an article. No, that did Biden fired him for these other reasons. Where's Joe Biden? Get him in front of Congress right now. Joe Biden, you think, and by the way, there are people that ask good questions in Congress. I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I wish I was there. Like during the investigations of Mueller, during the investigations of when Comey was there and other people like that. I really wish I was there because I feel like people dropped the ball. I would say, Biden, it's alleged that you thought that the prosecutor needed to be fired because he was not engaged in actual pursuing corrupt individuals, oligarchs. Biden would probably say yes. And I'd say, was Zlochevsky one of those people? That's what it's been reported. Okay. Your son worked for Zlochevsky, right? Yeah. Okay. You now know that it's been reported that your son received $25,000 a month, sometimes more, sometimes a little less, in payments from Zlochevsky's firm, and then that's not been investigating. Would you support starting up an investigation both in the Ukraine and the United States into your son's involvement into this company? Why isn't he being pulled forth and asked that? In 2016, Mr. Biden, why did you and Obama do nothing when the case against your son's employer, Zlochevsky, was finally buried? You thought it was important enough to pursue that you withheld $1 billion until the former prosecutor was fired. So why were you okay when a group connected to your embassy that you had closer connections to actually buried the investigation? Why did you call Lutsenko, the prosecutor that took over for Shokin, a solid guy? You thought he was okay? Do you still think that? Because he says that there's credible evidence that needs to be investigating of your exertion into the interference of this investigation and to your son's payments that he received from this corrupt individual. Do you still stand by your statement that he's a solid guy? But none of it will happen because it's corrupt, because the system's garbage. So remember, why are we here? How did we get here? A whistleblower said that they were troubled by Trump, allegedly, this is what happened, Trump making an alleged promise to a foreign leader who we're hearing was the leader of the Ukraine. Allegations are that that promise had to do with getting Ukrainian leader, or getting the Ukrainian government to reopen this investigation or continue to look into the investigation of Joe and Hunter Biden. We don't know any of it. We don't know. It's all allegation at this point. It's all guesswork. But the media's in a tizzy. Oh, it needs to be investigated. Oh, impeachment. The Democrats said, oh, this is corruption of the highest order. We go to Twitter, everyone. Yes, this is it. This will bring Trump down. This is our Stormy Daniels. This is our Russia collusion. This is our obstruction. This is our annulments. This is our tax returns. Oh, we were wrong about all those, but this is the one. Now we got him. We got him this time. This is the one. We got him. That's what we have on one hand. Everyone's so certain they don't know any of the facts. No one does. None of them do. I don't either. I don't know. And I reiterate, if Trump committed a crime, hold him accountable. I don't know in this situation what that crime would be. Don't we keep hearing? You can't charge a sitting president with the crime. Trump can basically promise anyone he wants. He can release classified information if he wants. He can say whatever he wants. If he blatantly said, ruin Joe Biden, I want you to make sure Joe Biden isn't president, I want you to say he's guilty, then yes, that's really crappy and he should be impeached. Hold him accountable. The chances of that happening are incredibly slim. If this happened at all, it's most likely he said something to the effect of, hey, Lutsenko, your chief prosecutor, is saying that he wants to talk to AG Barr. Before we give you this aid, let's make sure he talks to Barr about exactly what happened with that Biden investigation. I want you as the president to facilitate. Because Lutsenko's going public saying, yes, I want to talk to AG Barr. The head prosecutor in Ukraine is saying, I want to talk to the Attorney General in the United States. Maybe the president said, no, I'm not going to allow that. And Trump said, hey, if you're not going to let this guy give us evidence of potential crimes, then we're not going to work with you. That's not that bad. Trump's well within his rights to say that. But we don't know. That's the real point. Now, on the other hand, we do know that Joe Biden's son worked for these corrupt people. We know that for a fact. We know that that investigation was never completed. We know that for a fact. We know that there was supposedly, at least on paper, we don't know how strong the investigation was. We don't know if it was actually being followed through. But there was an open investigation on paper led by this guy Shokin into the company that Biden's son worked for, was a director of. We know that. We know that Biden threatened $1 billion to get that guy fired. We know that guy was fired, and then we know the case was buried. We now know that the guy that Biden called solid, the new prosecutor that came on, said, wait a minute. Since Biden opened his big trap and bragged about, yeah, I got them, I was the one who got them to fire this guy, we started to look into it. Because imagine it. Imagine you're the government of Ukraine, or you're the highest person in the legal system in the Ukrainian government, right? And some foreign leader's on TV bragging like, you want to know what I did? I force them to get rid of someone based on my whim. That's what I did. Don't you think that would stick in your craw? Isn't that foreign influence? Imagine if that was the U.S. government. Imagine if China said, hey, you know what? We'll lift sanctions if you fire Barr. You know, we'll give you a $100 billion trade deal if you get rid of Attorney General Barr. How do you think that would go? Oh, okay. You don't think that down the road, the next administration might be like, wait, what? We capitulated to the Chinese government and who to get rid of in our legal system? Sorry, no, that's improper foreign influence that we're going to investigate exactly what's going on here. So that's what happened. Lutsenko, again, the guy that was called solid by Biden, he's like, okay, we're going to look into this then, Mr. Biden. Oh, what's that? It appears as if your son did get all these payments that we never investigated. Now, does this prove that Hunter Biden's guilty? No, it looks shady, but it doesn't prove he's guilty. It really doesn't. But it proves there's reason for an investigation. And that investigation, its own right, in 2016 would have incredibly damaged the Democratic Party at a time where they were fighting to win an election. It doesn't matter if he's guilty or not, the investigation itself would have been bad and harmful. So they had every reason to not want that investigation into Hunter Biden. They might say, no, we wanted the investigation, but it was open on paper. And after they fired that prosecutor, it was no longer open on paper, was it? If they really wanted the investigation and the end of the corruption of Zlochevsky, then wouldn't they have been outraged after they got rid of that prosecutor when the group that was closer to the embassy that they had more contact with declined to further proceed with the case and shut it down even on paper? Wouldn't they have been outraged? But they weren't. And the media didn't care. And they still don't care. And the Dems still don't care. They're too busy focused on hypothetical. What could Trump have hypothetically said? That could hypothetically be reason for impeachment. What's the worst thing Trump could have said? I want you to find Biden guilty. I'll pay you money to do it. That's pretty bad, as I said. That would probably be reason for impeachment. That is equal to maybe slightly less bad as, I want you to find my son innocent. Because the first is political gamesmanship. And it's bad. It's really corrupt. But the second is more than that. It's not only political gamesmanship. It's protecting your own butt. It's corruption. I mean, so's the first. I mean, they're probably equally bad if I'm really honest about it. Now, there's a chance that that's what happened with Biden. We know that he forced the prosecutor to go. We know that it looked like his son got payments that were never investigated. We know that after that prosecutor was gone, the case was finally shut down even on paper. So there's a good chance that that's what happened. We at least know that the steps were taken in place. We just don't know if his son would have been found guilty or not. Or if that was the reason that Biden had for ousting them. But it's certainly worth investigating. But instead we're going to investigate the hypothetical of maybe what Trump said. Every single crime that's been alleged of Trump or people connected to him, every single one, I could prove and point to the exact same crime or occurring in a more severe case more blatantly. Every single time. Name one. Like, go ahead and name one here. Except maybe annulments. The only reason for annulments is because no president ever was as wealthy as Trump before he got in there. They didn't own property and stuff like him. They all got corruptly rich once they became president. That's why Obama, who said, sometimes enough's enough when it comes to money. That's why he's spending, $30 million on a lake house? Because sometimes enough money is enough money. That's why the Pelosi's and the Feinsteins of the world are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Getting paid a salary of $100,000 a year. How's that work? So annulments, okay, that's one. Which I don't see any crimes that were blatantly committed by Trump there, and it's stupid anyways. But other than that, name one. Obstruction of justice? Let's rack up. Let's see. We got Trump's mean tweets and firing Comey after Rosenstein recommended firing Comey. That's his big obstructions that he committed versus Hillary Clinton's team deleting subpoenaed evidence. Now, I'm no lawyer, but I'm willing to bet that it wouldn't just be suggestions of possible corruption if Trump had evidence subpoenaed to him by Mueller and Trump was like, okay, I'll get that to you tomorrow, and then said, nah, I deleted it. I'm willing to bet that would have been the nail in the coffin for Trump. That would have been clear-cut obstruction. But when Hillary did it, no problem. Or how about, let's think of another crime. Failing to register as a foreign lobbyist. Okay, Manafort sitting in solitary confinement. Podesta, that he, in the actual indictment, was said to be working exactly with the Podesta group. The Podesta group got to file retroactive paperwork. How about lying to the FBI? Flynn, who you could watch my video, didn't even lie to the FBI. What it was the reason Flynn pled guilty to lying was because they threatened to go after his son. So he pled guilty so they wouldn't go after his son. Because as the judge in Manafort's case said, it was never about actually prosecuting people for crimes. All of this was about trying to flip and get any dirt on Donald Trump that they could. So they said, hey, Flynn, prosecuting your son does us no good to getting towards Trump. But if you admit that you broke a law while you were working with Trump, that does help us get dirt on Trump. So that's what he pled guilty to. But if you read the 302s, and please go back and watch my video on this. Again, another issue I haven't seen anyone cover. The 302s, which are, unbelievably, if you didn't know this, our FBI doesn't like set up a camera. Like if you watch, I love watching the First 48. You watch the First 48, right? You got all these police departments, and they'll have the little camera up in the corner like you used to see in the cop shows, and they'll bring in the witness, or, the suspect, and go, how you doing? Can I get you some coffee? And they got their notepad there, and they're like, okay, where were you on the night of, that's how they do it, right? And it's filmed, and you get to see it, and they'll blur faces or whatever, but there's a film of it. The FBI doesn't do that for some reason. Despite the fact that we all have smartphones, they don't film it or even audio record it. They take notes. How convenient, right? Now remember, the FBI agents that took the notes on Flynn originally said they didn't think he lied. And now when those notes were released, the 302, I went through them and it says specifically that what Flynn's accused of lying was he says, I don't know, I don't recall, it could have happened. That's what he says. They claim that's a lie to the FBI. That's what Mueller said. Juxtapose that with the FBI notes that say specifically Mills and Abedin lied to the FBI. You know what their lie was? They both were on record as saying, they testified to the FBI, they had no knowledge whatsoever of Hillary Clinton's private server until after her tenure as Secretary of State. But in reality, which I think was 2013? In reality, they have email exchange going back as early as 2010 discussing her private server. So they lied to the FBI, cut and dry. And not just an immaterial lie. Remember, what was Flynn accused of lying about? Flynn was accused of lying about Obama sanctioned some Russian officials, and Flynn called his counterpart in Russia because Flynn was going to be in incoming national security. And he said, hey, don't do anything rash. Don't retaliate against us. When Trump gets in there, we'll try to work this out. Which is good. I'm glad he was doing that. In fact, if Trump has a tenuous relationship with a country when he's outgoing, I'll have no problem if the incoming person, even if it's a Democrat, it's like, hey, we contacted Iran and was like, look, don't freak out. When we get in there, things could be different. That's fine. I don't want someone to freak out in the United States. No problem. But that's what Flynn was accused of lying about. No crime or anything, just doing his regular every day-to-day job that every incoming administration would always do, trying to make the world better and the situation better for the incoming administration. That was his supposed lie. The supposed lie with Mills and Abedin was a lie to try to keep themselves and Hillary out of prison. No, we didn't know about the server. That's a lie. We didn't know about the thing that's an alleged crime. Yes, you did. So they materially lied about a specific ongoing investigation. By the way, FBI agents also in their notes wrote that they thought it defied credulity that Hillary Clinton thought that a C on a document was alphabetical order and not confidential or classified. Defied credulity. In other words, that means she lied. We don't believe she's that stupid. That is a lie to the FBI. So the FBI agents didn't think that Flynn lied, but he was charged with lying. The FBI agents did think that Mills, Abedin, and Hillary lied, and they weren't charged. You see how that works? Or how about lying to Congress? Let's take that. Cohen lied to Congress. You know what his big lie was? Cohen's lie was, we stopped talking about Trump Tower in February, but actually it was March. Or I don't know the exact months. But they continued to talk about Trump Tower a month or two after when Cohen originally testified. That was it. For that, he's going to jail. And he's turned, and now he's trying to smear Trump in any way possible to save his reputation and his career because he realized he made a horrible mistake going against the deep state. That's how powerful they are. They'll weaponize the intel. His house was raided in the middle of the night. His records were gone through for 10 years previously. How many crimes do you think we could get of everyone in Washington if we raided their lawyer's house tonight with the FBI in the middle of the night? Hundreds? Thousands of crimes? And what'd they get on Trump? Nothing. Cohen had some, taxi medallion crap from 6 years ago? Manafort was improper lobbying 5-6 years ago? I mean, it's actually incredible they didn't find more on Trump so far. I assume they would, and even though they got it by shady means, if Trump committed a crime, he committed a crime. And they still haven't came out with anything. So that was Cohen lying to Congress. What happened with Comey when he lied to Congress? Check out my video on it. Read the IG report. Comey was asked, who all did you give these memos to? He says, I gave it to my friend blah, 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 because I was worried about blah, blah, blah. Actually, he gave it to 3 friends. The question was, who all did you give it to? Not name me one person. So he lied. He was then asked to clarify. He said, what all did you give? He said, I gave him this one memo. That's a lie. He gave him 3 memos. When the IG asked him about the discrepancy, Comey said, I didn't think I had to mention my other friends because they were acting as my attorney. Well, guess what? So was the 3rd friend, according to Comey and other testimony. And that still doesn't make it not a lie. You could have said, I gave it to one friend and I gave it to my attorneys. He didn't. And he said, the other reason I wasn't honest was because no one followed up on it. That's still a lie. Half the people that lied to the FBI under Trump that was connected, maybe they didn't follow up on it. What about Brennan's lies to Congress? What about Clapper lying to Congress with important stuff about me and your 4th Amendment rights? Who said, no, the NSA doesn't knowingly collect data on American citizens. Lie. Yet only people connected to Trump. Every single incident. Every single one. Every time there's an investigation, if it's against Trump, it's as hard as possible. Raid houses in the middle of the night. Get statements. Try to get people to flip on each other, right? With the Hillary investigation and all the others, it's the exact opposite. Well, we don't want to prosecute Comey. Well, we're prosecuting McCabe. Well, with Hillary, we'll give everyone immunity and smash all their devices. That's the corruption. That's exactly what this story's showing once more with this whistleblower stuff. So, yeah, I'm about to wrap it up here. I have more. I was actually, before this came up last night, I had a bunch of other stuff to do a video on. But, I'll probably just leave it here for now and go get about with my, what is this, Friday evening. Yeah, my wife works till 6:30 on Friday, so that's my day to kind of do stuff. But, so I'll wrap this up. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Yeah, just look, this story's going to keep exploding. It's going to keep being pushed over and over. This will be the next nail in the coffin. My prediction is, who knows specifically what Trump said. I predict that they'll obviously say this is reason for impeachment. This is horrible corruption. But my hope is that that this leads the people to see how corrupt the Obama and Biden administration was, how corrupt the media and the Democrats were that want to bury this story. And it, at the very least, it makes this story come to light, that people see how corrupt this story with Biden and the Ukraine was, that they never would have known about, because we don't have a real independent media. When some fat guy like me sitting on a chair could do a better job than 95% of our media, there's a problem. And I tweeted this the other day. By the way, when the press is always patting themselves on the back and saying, the free press, it's so important to the public, and that's why we're such an important institution. We're kind of the last bastion of truth to the people and holding truth to power. And that's true. All that's true. Except it's not them. The free press is important. We just don't have one. That's why you get people just saying, well, CNN said this, that's that. Or, well, Fox News said this, that's that. That's not what we should be doing. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching. I'm going to be putting more material out. If you don't already, please follow me on Twitter at Noah Robert at Twitter, or at BitChute, which is just Robert Noah at BitChute. And I usually put the links on most of my videos because you see them there. Recommend me to some other people if you could. Those of you that are my friends like Joe, hopefully I'll catch up with you soon that I know in real life. I might know some of you others too and just don't know your screen names. So, but yeah, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm kind of busy with work and everything. I usually work about 70, 80 hours a week. And then I'm going to try to continue my political career here at some point. I got some things in the works, so I'm working with that. But I will be trying to do material more regularly, trying to tweet and stuff like that more regularly, doing videos. So please follow me on those platforms and recommend me to some people. I'd love to get more of a following because, one, because I'm selfish and I would just like to have more people listening to me. But I also think that I say things in a way, and I talk about things that I don't necessarily hear at other places. And even if those things might not be wrong, I think it's good to get different ideas out there, different perspectives. So I'd really appreciate it if you could help me out with that. So if anyone ever wants to be on the show, you can email me, is the best way to get a hold of me if you don't have my phone number. And I'll type it here for you. It's rob.nor@gmail.com. So feel free to get a hold of me there. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good one.